Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to Let's Start Story on What If Harry Became Earth's Protectorand Daphne is Queen. Part 2. So do 4 blue hearts. Comment, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video, and please share with your friends and watch till end. Also check out Patreon for I have upload Harry x Hermione uncensored spicy version, link in description. What in the name of Merlin's unmentionables are you doing there, Harry? Ouch. I hadn't expected her to finish her shower that soon. Her sudden exclamation startled me, causing me to bump my head under the dining table where I was hunched on all fours. I crawled backwards, careful not to bump my head once again, and sat back on my haunches, while I rubbed the back of my head. Daphne, clad in a terrycloth bathrobe and still toweling her hair, looked down at me, the corner of her mouth twitching. Care to explain what this is all about? She asked, motioning with her hand to the few envelopes in my hand and the many more scattered all around the living room. It was our first day back at sea. Daphne and I had just returned from our morning swim and were getting ready for the day. Well, I thought to get the mail out of the banishing box while you were in the shower. I somehow forgot about it ever since Okinawa. Daphne gasped. You haven't attended to your mail for what, 2 weeks? The goblins will have your hide, Harry. I nodded sheepishly. Yeah, the box was full to the brim, and when I opened it, it kind of exploded. I gestured helplessly around the room. This is the result. To her credit, I have to say that Daphne tried not to laugh, the key word being, tried. She lowered her eyes and bit her lips, the corners of her mouth twitching. A moment later, however, the mirth bubbled up in her like a geyser, and she laughed until the tears streamed down her face. You're such a sweet idiot, she informed me once she calmed down. While I had no objections to being called sweet, I took offense at the idiot. I'm not, I protested good-naturedly. She bent down and kissed me. You are. Why don't you use a summoning charm, love? With the bridge right below us. Heaven knows what magic will do to all the nautical equipment there. I'd rather not use magic on the floor if I don't have to. You've got a point, Daphne conceded. I'll help you, then. Move over. She also got down on all fours. And together we collected our mail within a short time. I was right. A few people who recognized me from the photos in the Prophet sent me howlers, Daphne said, waving a note from the goblins in her hand. I stared at another note from the goblins on top of the pile I'd gathered, and clenched my teeth. Apparently, about half a dozen letters addressed to Daphne contained questionable content, and had been sent to the Aura department. I think you ought to look at this. Daphne paled when she read the note. I stepped beside her and took her in my arms. I'm sorry, love. It's all my fault. You're made a target because they want to get back at me. Maybe you're better off without me. Daphne's demeanor instantly changed, her eyes hardened, and she slapped me on the arm in return. Not too hard, but hard enough to tell me she meant business. Idiot. Firstly, you don't know if it's about you, Harry. Some purebloods would also have taken offense if the White seen me with a Weasley or a Muggleborn and sent me something nasty. Secondly, there's no safer place for me than right by your side, because these morons are too cowardly to cross you. And thirdly, my love, I'd suggest you start to employ your inner Slytherin when it comes to me, and not your Gryffindor side. I'm not a damsel in distress, you know. By the end of her rant, however, her gaze softened and she gave me a kiss on the cheek to take the sting out of her words. I had to laugh at that, in spite of my concerns about her safety. Thanks for the roasting, Daphne. Well, someone has to keep your superhero ego in check. She grinned. Then she gave me a soft push. Get ready, Harry. I'll order breakfast while you're in the shower. I reluctantly stepped away from her. Don't you want to go down to the restaurant? With that amount of mail on our hands. She pointed at the rather high stack on the desk with raised eyebrows. We'll be lucky if we get everything out of the way during the next 2 days before we reach Saigon. You're probably right, I grimaced and went into the bathroom. When I returned, our breakfast had been delivered to the suite and served on the veranda. Daphne sat at the table, sipping tea and sorting through the stack of letters. Most of them were for me, but there was also a rather bulky envelope for her. It's from dear cousin Melissa, she told me with a grimace. She's probably giving you a hard time again because she wants you to move in with them as soon as you're back in England, I speculated as I sat down. Daphne furrowed her eyebrows. Probably, she replied, but her voice sounded slightly strained. I looked up from my plate, which I had begun loading with food. Is something worrying you, Daphne? She sighed, worrying her lower lip with her teeth. If Melissa has read Skeeter's article, there are a few ways for her to make my life difficult, she said. I'll read her letter after breakfast. I don't want to spoil my appetite. I laughed at that and began to peruse my own mail. As I'd expected, most of it was from my board of advisors, and I resolved to deal with them as soon as I finished breakfast. There was also a letter from Hermione and another one from Ginny. I had expected to hear from them after I'd seen the article, so I wasn't surprised. After breakfast, I went back into the living room and sat down at the desk there. While Daphne retreated to the Sun Island with the letter she'd received from her cousin Melissa. I was so immersed in my own work that I didn't look up for the next couple of hours. Around lunchtime, however, a somewhat lightheaded feeling, and a kink in my neck, reminded me that I needed a break. I stood up and stretched, then stepped out onto the veranda. The sight that met me gave me a sense of déjà vu. Daphne sat cross-legged on the Sun Island and was staring out into the vast expanse of water. I could only see her profile. It was a stony mask, a sure sign that she was in emotional turmoil. I climbed on the Sun Island beside her and put an arm around her. She started. Clearly she'd been lost so deeply in her thoughts that she hadn't noticed my entrance. Her face softened as she turned her head to look at me. And she gave me a ghost of a smile. Want to talk about it? I asked her. She leaned against me with an unhappy sigh. No, I don't want to talk about it. But unfortunately, we'll need to talk about it. That bad. She sighed again. Even worse. All right, don't talk in riddles, love. Spill it. It's because of that Skeeter article in the Prophet. Till then nobody knew we were traveling together, and while cousin Melissa wasn't thrilled about it, she wasn't overly concerned either, because she thought nobody would ever find out. But the article, and especially the photos, changed everything. She stopped and bit her lip. Yeah, we did look rather intimate with each other in them, I agreed. That's exactly what cousin Melissa wrote. She says, no one who's seen these photos would believe we're only friends. Well, they'd be right, I interrupted her with a grin. That got her to grin as well, but I earned a light slap on the arm for my interruption. Prat. Yeah, but a lovable prat, I replied and kissed her. She relaxed in my arms. That you are, she agreed when we came up for air. The dreamy look in her eyes made me want to kiss her again. But she forestalled me by putting her hands on my chest. No, don't distract me, love. We both didn't understand the repercussions that article would have in pureblood circles when we saw it, Harry. I thought nobody would recognize me, but I was wrong. My dorm mates from Slytherin did, as did quite a lot of people my parents socialized with, and they all started to gossip. I shrugged. Let them talk. People have talked about me ever since I came to Hogwarts. That's another drawback of being the girlfriend of the chosen one, I'm afraid. You'll always be in the spotlight. This is not about being the girlfriend of the chosen one, she contradicted me. It's about keeping the family name taint-free. I've told you about the conduct that is expected of pureblood girls and how little their opinion counts. Even though I'm the head of house, I'm regarded as a young girl who has to be deferential to her elders. That means Melissa is in the position to haul me over the coals for tainting the Greengrass name. She's furious. Harry, not so much because she thinks I'm having an affair with you, but because I broke pureblood law number 1. And that is, don't get caught, she answered dryly. Unfortunately, I got caught. And now I'll have to pay the price. Not you, love, I replied and pulled her closer. She gave me a soft kiss on the cheek. You're sweet, Harry, but that's not how it works. For purebloods, I'm the slut and you're the stud that scored with me. My grip around her shoulder tightened. Never again talk about yourself like that, love. No matter what, we'll end this together. If anyone has a problem with us traveling together, he or she can talk to me about it, if they dare. She leaned her head against my shoulder and chuckled softly. I'd love to see that. We lapsed into silence. Somehow, I knew she hadn't told me everything, so I asked after a couple of minutes, what did Melissa demand of you? Daphne let out a short laugh. You don't miss much, do you? Melissa has ordered me back to London. Though, what she'll achieve with that when the damage is already done, is beyond me. My heart missed a beat and then dropped into the pit of my stomach. I knew how much her family meant to Daphne, and that the thought of being in the middle of a pureblood scandal must be rather painful for her. "When will you leave?" She raised her head from my shoulder and gave me another of her special looks that made my heart glow. "Don't be ridiculous, Harry. I'll stay," she replied and kissed me. HPDG. We didn't talk about Melissa's demand again, though Daphne remained rather pensive. I tried my best to distract her, and persuaded her with a late al fresco lunch at the Lido Cafe, and then to annihilate me in a couple of rounds of shuffleboard after that. Daphne's mood perked up during the afternoon and she was her usual self again when the butler brought the customary champagne and pralines to mark the start of the evening. "I'll write to Melissa tomorrow and tell her to bugger off," she told me over the rim of her glass. I laughed at that. "I sincerely hope you'll phrase your answer a trifle more politely, love." Daphne scrunched up her nose. "Probably. But I'll make sure that she knows what I think." HPDG. As Daphne had prophesied, my board of advisors was furious with me for having been incommunicado for 2 weeks, so I spent the next morning at the desk, making up for my misconduct. When I was ready to send my mail through the banishing box, Daphne handed me her letter to Melissa to send it with the rest. "I hope that'll tee her up for the remainder of the cruise," she remarked as she watched me tapping the box with my wand. Somehow I doubted that. Melissa hadn't seemed like the kind of woman to be silenced easily, and the persistence she showed trying to get Daphne to behave like a proper pureblood only reinforced my opinion of her. I knew I was being selfish when I hoped that Daphne's stubbornness would turn out to be stronger than her persistence. Daphne broke into my thoughts. "You don't look convinced." "No, I'm not," I admitted, slipping my wand back into its invisible holster. Daphne sighed. "Neither am I. But I can hope, can't I?" I stood up from the desk and walked over to her. "Daphne, I've been thinking." I began, but was not sure how to go on. "You know that's dangerous, Harry," she quipped. Then she looked into my face and sobered. "Why are you so serious, love?" I put my hands on her shoulder and drew her towards me. "Do you remember what you said to me on the floor of your bedroom in the leaky cauldron?" At first, she didn't understand, but then she blushed and nodded. "You said you wouldn't mind to keep me around for the rest of your life," and I replied that could be arranged. I said and brushed a strand of her hair out of her face. She nodded, her eyes once again shining with that light that made me want to do anything to keep her happy for the rest of her life. "I meant it," I told her and tightened my embrace around her. "I also meant every word," she whispered. I thought I'd known that. It was evident in every kiss she gave me and every time she looked at me. But hear it from her almost made me to want to burst with happiness, and I couldn't help the goofy smile that spread over my face. My heart raced when I mustered all my Gryffindor courage to ask the next question. "Look, love, we both know where we're heading. Won't it take the pressure off from you if we make it official?" At first, there was nothing but pure happiness on her face, and the light in her eyes almost blinded me. The next moment, however, the look of bliss gave way to one of determination. My heart sank into the deepest pits of my stomach. "As much as I'd love to say yes, Harry, this doesn't feel right," she told me gently. "I don't want to become engaged for the sake of Melissa, because she's afraid of her reputation in pureblood circles. My own parents would never have expected that from me. My mother grew up among muggles and always mocked the Victorian moral code of Britain's magical society. My father would have been scandalized, but he loved me enough to give me the freedom to make my own choices." I frowned at her words. "I can't say that I don't understand your reasoning," I replied with a sigh. "We'll both know when the time is right, love," she comforted me. Then she gave me an impish grin. "I expect a grand romantic gesture then," she told me. "Rose petals, violins, you get the drift." "No, Daphne, honestly." I stammered and blanched. Her delighted laughter told me that she'd taken the mickey. "Minx," I told her and kissed her. HPDG. I didn't come around to read Ginny and Hermione's letters until later that afternoon. Daphne gave me a sympathy tick-side glance when I climbed beside her on the Sun Island, the letters in my hand, but didn't comment. Instead, she immersed herself in the fashion magazines she'd bought on our way back to the suite after lunch. Thankful that she had given me my space, I opened the letter from Ginny first. "Dearest, why did you cheat on me with that slut? Have you forgotten all about the bond we share? I'd Read enough and crumpled up the letter in my hand. That was sick. Daphne gave me a questioning look. It's not worth reading it, even less repeating it, I answered her silent question. The anger welled up in me again. And the small paper ball in my hand vanished. Impressive, Daphne remarked and kissed me on the cheek. I had no idea you've practiced wandless magic. I stared at the empty palm of my hand. I didn't. It was unintentional. Daphne chuckled. Don't you think you're a little old for accidental magic? She put the magazine in her lap and snuggled up against me, her head on my shoulder and her arms around my waist. You know, love, I'll worm it out of you anyway, so you'd better tell me right away what she did to make you that angry and spare both of us a lot of headache and tea. Email we could use for a more pleasant activity. She grinned at me suggestively. I laughed and put my arm around her. If you put it that way, it seems the only logical course of action. Daphne's face sobered when I repeated the first sentence of Ginny's letter to her. I agree, that's sick. It's as if she's lost any connection to reality when it comes to you. By now, she must have realized that you are over her and moved on. But she seems to be clinging to a past that never was. I mean, what bond did you share? That was a tough question. Though Daphne knew about the unintentional Horcrux inside of me and Ginny's reaction when she found out, I'd never told her about Ginny's possession through Voldemort. It was not my secret to tell, and we hadn't been that close when we had talked about he Horcruxes that I trusted her enough to share that information. But that had surely changed during the last few weeks, so I took a deep breath and told her everything about the events of our second year at Hogwarts from my perspective. Her face had a slightly green hue when I ended. Poor girl, she said quietly. Did she ever get help to overcome that nightmare? Not that I know of, I replied. I think Mrs. Weasley liked to pretend it never happened. Mr. Weasley leaves the management of the house and the raising of the children completely to her. In true pureblood fashion, Daphne interrupted me with a grimace. That had never occurred to me before. You're right, I told her. Whatever, Ginny was left to her own devices when she returned to Hogwarts for her second year. She'd missed a lot during her possession. And since she was never academically inclined, just like Ron, she struggled at school. That's something I found out during the few weeks we were together. She was working for her OWLs back then. But even I could see that her work was below mediocre. The only subject she excelled in was defense, and of course Quidditch. Much like you, Daphne teased me. Maybe you aren't such a bad match after all. You take that back. I threatened and tickled her side. I'll have you to know that I'm no slouch in my other subjects, though I'm of course not as good as Hermione. Daphne shrieked, but quickly admitted defeat. Sorry, love, I couldn't resist. She grinned and kissed me on the cheek. Nobody is as good as Granger. She's not human, but I can't see what the W.'s let school problems have to do with her obsession with you. I ran a hand through my hair. Well, she was already infatuated with the boy who lived even before we started Hogwarts. That I rescue ed her from the Chamber of Secrets added only more fuel to that fire. All through her second year she'd sit in the common room and throw surreptitious glances at me. She thought I didn't notice it, but of course I did. And was rather embarrassed about it. I can imagine. Daphne chuckled. Any 13-year-old would have cringed at that. Exactly. I agreed. I didn't realize it back then but the events of her first year left her without any friends among her peers. All she had was her infatuation with me. I think Hermione was the only girl she talked to. However, she seemed to change during our fourth year and started dating. I didn't give her much thought in that year, to be honest. You had other things to worry about, Daphne replied. Don't remind me, I chuckled mirthlessly. In our fifth year, she started talking to me. Not much, but she could be around me without embarrassing herself. Hermione told me that she'd got over me, and I actually was glad about that. Daphne gave me a shrewd side glance. Really? Come on, Harry, weren't you slightly disappointed that the little girl who'd hung onto every word you said had grown up? I blushed and laughed. Maybe a little. But, with everything that was going on that year I didn't give it much thought. Was it always like that with you? No, you don't have to tell me, it was. It's amazing that you never flunked out of school. I wonder how you ever found the time to do your homework. Daphne sighed. I'm good at multitasking, I grinned, which had her snort. Actually, Ginny was great during our fifth year. She helped me More than once when I'd hit a rough spot, and she came with me in that suicide mission at the ministry. I didn't have to explain that. Daphne already knew everything about that ever since we talked about Sirius. Daphne's expression grew thoughtful. She'd changed her tactics. After all, getting over you is not quite the same as giving up on you, she observed. You're probably right, I agreed and dropped a kiss on her head. Well, our relationship changed the summer before our 6th year. I spent some time at the burrow, and suddenly I started to notice Ginny. I blushed, not sure if it was wise to talk with my current girlfriend about the way I fell for my ex. Go on, she encouraged me. I promise I won't get jealous of your past. I still wasn't sure, but nevertheless proceeded to telephone Daphne everything about the monster in my chest whenever I saw Ginny with Dean, and that the only way to calm it down seemed to be to spend as much time as possible snogging her when we finally got together. Daphne's face had grown grim during my tale, and when I finally stopped, looking at her uneasily, she was quiet for a rather long time. Daphne, I asked tentatively. I'd been right, it had been a mistake to talk to her about my relationship with Ginny. She started, then looked at me with a smile. I'm sorry, Harry, I didn't mean to worry you. Again, the grim line appeared around her mouth. Harry, did it ever occur to you that you might have been fed a love potion during your stay at the burrow that forced you to notice Ginny? I was taken aback. The Weasleys would never do that to me. Wouldn't they? She sounded doubtful. Honestly, Harry, I'm not so sure about that. What George told us about his mother digging out the family grimoire and looking up love potions points to another direction. Sorry, love, but everything about the way you reacted to her just screams love potion to me. I considered her words. She was right, the symptoms of a slow-burning love potion with a delay element were all there. But then I shook my head. I don't think so. You forgot the time we were on the run. I really was heartbroken about her. Just ask Hermione. I spent every night obsessing over the Marauder's map, looking for her dot at Hogwarts. Withdrawal symptoms, Daphne stated promptly. Quite a lot of common love potions leave that kind of behavior if they are discontinued to be given to the victim. You should know that, Harry. It was in our potions curriculum in our 4th year. That silenced me. I stared out to sea for a long time, my mind in upheaval. Everything I'd lived in during the last 2 years before Voldemort's downfall had suddenly been turned upside down. I pulled my arm from Daphne's shoulder and leaned forward, resting my elbows on my propped-up knee. And rubbing my head with both hands until my hair stuck out in every direction. Fuck. Daphne slid an arm around me and softly kissed the back of my shoulder. Yeah, she agreed. Again, everything points at Ron and Ginny, I said. Who else would be able to give me the potion while we were at Hogwarts? True, but they must have had help. From what I saw of the Weasel during our potions classes, he wasn't able to brew a simple boil-curing potion. I also doubt the Weaselet would be able to brew such a potion. Do you think Granger was also part of the plan? Please, Merlin, no. Not Hermione too. I groaned, and Daphne tightened her grip around my shoulder in silent comfort. We were silent for a rather long time. I thinking about the bomb Daphne had just placed in front of my nose, and Daphne giving me comfort. I don't think so, I eventually said. She was the one who always stuck with me when Ron had one of his bouts of jealousy. Mrs. Weasley is more likely, I think. She seems to have a penchant for love potions. I remember that she told Ginny and Hermione of having used one on her husband. Daphne made a face. No wonder the Weaselet or the Weasel didn't think twice to use one on you. Yeah, but we'll probably never be able to prove it, unless they try it again, I agreed. Probably not. Daphne nodded. I sighed and looked at the other letter I'd brought with me to the Sun Island and grimaced. I'm almost afraid to open it. Merlin knows what Hermione will throw at me. What a brave Gryffindor, Daphne quipped and kissed me on the cheek. Get it over with, Harry. You'll feel better after that. She pulled her discarded magazines towards her and leaned back in the cushions, resuming her reading. I opened the letter and started reading. Dear Harry, thank you for your long letter. I think that was the longest letter I've ever got from you. I'm glad that you told me what you've been up to since you left the burrow. Ron and I have been quite worried about you. I am especially glad you decided to undergo therapy. To be honest, I often thought you needed professional help during our school days, considering everything you had to go through. You must be thrilled that you've found out more about your family. Though, it seems to me that a few things are quite different than what you thought before. You must tell us about that soon. You sound like a patriarch W. Can you talk about managing your family holdings? Is it really that much? From what Ron told me about the contents of your vault, I know you are rich, but surely not as rich as the Malfoys. How nice for you that you are traveling. I've read about the Princess Isabella, and I envy you. You must tell me everything about the places you visited when you return. Though I am amazed at your choice. Princess Isabella is among the most expensive luxury cruise ships in the world. That's so unlike you, Harry. You really shouldn't squander your money like that. The fact that I know you are on the Princess Isabella probably answers your question if I have read the article about you in the Daily Prophet. Yes, I did read it, and if you hadn't already told me in your letter that you're interested in someone, it would probably have had me faint like a Victorian lady. You and Daphne Greengrass, the Ice Queen of Slytherin. I can't think of a more unlikely couple. You look different in the photos, with a new haircut and posh clothes. Is that Greengrass work? I almost didn't recognize you. What's got into you, Harry? You used to be a frugal and modest boy, cruising around the world on a luxury ship is something I'd have expected from Malfoy, but never from you. Greengrass must have changed you quite a lot, and I'm not happy about that. I won't help you to take the easy route away from Ginny, Harry. It's appalling how you treated her. I'd never have thought you would be the kind of guy who sweet-talks a girl into sleeping with him and then walks away. Ron is still furious with you because of that. And he's got every right to be so. You know how conservative the magical world is. Taking away Ginny's virginity and not marrying her is an insult to the whole Weasley family. Of course, Edie is furious that you are together with Greengrass. I can't blame him on that. She's from a very dark family, Mrs. Weasley told me. I can't believe you fell for a girl who stands for everything we fought against. It makes me wonder if your feelings for her are real or the result of a love potion. Be careful, Harry, she is probably after your money. I hope to hear from you again soon. Your friend, Hermione. I placed the letter back on my lap and sighed. Daphne looked up from her magazines. That bad? Hermione seems to think that you used a love potion on me because you're after my money. She also thinks I've slept with Ginny and walked out on her as soon as I got what I wanted, I told her, unable to keep the anger out of my voice. Unbelievable. Daphne shook her head. She pushed the magazines away and scrambled onto my lap. She linked her arms behind my neck and gave me a light peck on the lips. Her letter actually would be amusing if you weren't that vexed about it. That's the pot calling the kettle black, isn't it? My arms instinctively slipped around her waist and I pulled her closer to me, relishing the comfort our closeness gave me. Yeah, but the bad thing is that Hermione, Ron, Ginny and Mrs. Weasley probably will advertise their opinion to anyone who's willing to listen to them. Can you imagine the gossip that'll greet us when we're back home? People will be ready to tear and feather you, Daphne. She was unfazed. Then it's a good thing that the draft of Skeeter's article arrived today. I've already proofread it. Skeeter kept her side of the bargain, so I suggest we send it back to her as soon as you've also had a look, and preempt the gossip. My sly little snake. I grinned and covered her mouth with my lips. Suffice to say that I didn't come around to read the draft of Skeeter's article until much later that day. DG. We were distracted from our worries about delusional, love potion delivering ex-girlfriends, meddling cousins and gossiping and scheming friends by a visit to Saigon. The ship's shuttle dropped us off at the Rex Hotel. Daphne and I had booked a cookery course. Our teacher and guide was already waiting for us at the hotel. At first, we had a short sightseeing tour of Saigon. The almost 8 years I'd spent so far in the magical world had contained more than a small share of adventure and excitement, but nothing during that time had prepared me for the sheer, utter chaos that was Saigon. The streets, and sometimes even the sidewalks, were controlled by motorbikes. Lots and lots of motorbikes. Our guide had told us that sites he'd show us were within easy walking distance of the hotel. That was easier said than done. It's like walking through an obstacle course, Daphne had laughed. We constantly had to be on lookout for motorbikes using the sidewalk as a shortcut, jump over obstacles in our way, navigate around businesses that displayed their goods on the sidewalk, and brave the adventure of crossing the rivers of motorcycle traffic. The heat and the traffic fumes were overwhelming, and I felt beads of sweat forming on my back and running down between my shoulder blades. The adventure ended temporarily at the Bitexo Financial Tower, where we took the elevator to the Saigon Skydeck on the 49th floor. The view of the city and the Mekong River was breathtaking. Our guide pointed out the landmarks of the city, but soon ushered us back on the crowded street. The next stop was a wet market that took place in a narrow side alley. "This place gives the word crowded a whole new meaning," I said to Daphne. "That's an understatement, it's jam-packed," Daphne exclaimed and grabbed my hand tightly. Compared to the alley we were about to enter, Diagon Alley was a broad boulevard and as calm as Privet Drive on a Sunday afternoon. Innumerable shops lined the narrow alley, their goods on display on the street and narrowing the space between the two sides of the alley even more. We had to squeeze through, walking one behind the other. Daphne held my hand in a death grip, afraid to get lost in the crowd, and I admit I was tempted to grab our guide by the shirt tails for the same reason. The color, full array and quantity of the many different vegetables, herbs, meats, fish and spices for sale were mind-blowing, as were the noise and the many odors of fish, herbs and spices that permeated the air. Our guide introduced us to the many vegetables and spices that were new to us, and bought the ingredients we'd need for the meal he wanted to prepare with us. The cookery course took place in an annex of the Rex Hotel. We prepared fried spring rolls, a salad of lotus roots, pork and shrimps, caramelized fish cooked in a traditional clay pot, steamed fish with vegetables and a dip made of lots of garlic, chili and fish sauce. It soon became evident that Daphne was used to house elves and never had to work in the kitchen. "Ouch!" she exclaimed and sucked her thumb. I bit on the inside of my cheeks to prevent my laughter. She glared at me. "Not a word, Potter." While our guide went and got a patch, I asked under my breath, "How did you ever manage in potions?" That got me another glare, but then she relented. "Tracy did the cutting and preparing, while I did the actual brewing," she whispered back, just in time before our guide returned with the patch. Daphne thanked him with a broad smile. Soon after that, the meal was finished, and we sat down to sample the result of our work. It was simply delicious, and I fell in love with the Vietnamese kitchen that day. Daphne rolled her eyes in delight while she bit into the crispy spring rolls. "That's absolutely divine," she enthused. As a result, we both ate much more than we'd thought possible and were pleasantly filled and tea. I read when we bade goodbye to our teacher and guide. It was not yet time for the ship's shuttle to return, but Daphne and I were too full and tired to venture out onto the street once more. Instead, on recommendation of our guide, we went to the rooftop restaurant of the hotel and sipped on the fantastic Vietnamese coffee while we watched the crazy life on the streets from high above. It was a lazy and relaxed way to end our day in Saigon. Of course it didn't stay like that. I had learned long ago that my life was rarely ever always relaxed. The day in Saigon had been nothing than a small reprieve from the parties that haunted us. The next morning, the banishing box brought me another letter from Kingsley, containing the Daily Prophet, with the exclusive interview we'd given Skeeter. Daphne and I sat side by side on the Sun Island when we read it. Love blossoms out of tragedy. Chosen one talks about love and plans. By Rita Skeeter. That's as bad as I'd feared. I groaned. Daphne shook her head at me. You've approved it, Harry. True, but it somehow looks worse when it's printed in the newspaper, I replied. Get used to it or raise objections when you proofread, but don't whine afterwards. Daphne told me without the slightest trace of sympathy. I wisely decided to keep my mouth shut and continued to read the article. Truthfully, it wasn't that bad. Skeeter had kept her end of the bargain and printed the version of the interview that had been approved by Daphne and me. It covered everything we'd talked about at the Leaky Cauldron and lacked any of the extra embellishments Skeeter was so fond of. The only addition we hadn't approved beforehand was a hint about an interesting announcement that was to be expected from us soon. I'm sorry, Harry, I had no clue that she was going to print that. Daphne said after we'd finished the article. It wasn't entirely unexpected, I shrugged. After all, she did ask about an impending engagement and I didn't deny it. Daphne blushed. I don't want you to feel as if you're forced into something, Harry. I burst out laughing. Daphne, love, I think I've proved often enough that it's impossible to force me into something I am not behind 100%. I put my arms around her and drew her close to me. Besides that, you know as well as I where we are heading. We set the pace, Daphne. Not some obnoxious reporter who wants a headline or your cousin who wants to prevent a scandal in pureblood circles. It will happen when we both think it's right, don't you agree? Her blush got deeper, but she didn't avert her eyes and nodded. Good. I smiled and gave her a peck on the lips. Then I turned to Kingsley's letter. To my amazement, he was very supportive of my relationship with Daphne. Politically, you made a very good choice, Harry, he wrote. The Greengrass are traditionally a neutral family. Your relationship with a daughter from a neutral pureblood family will go a long way to heal the breaches in our society. I wasn't that convinced, considering the howlers Daphne got from her friends, but it was nice to know that at least one of my friends wasn't against me. At this stage of my life I was more inclined to listen to Kingsley's advice, anyway, than to Ron and Hermione. I turned to the rest of my letters. To my surprise, I had received a letter from Matthew, Melissa's husband. Under the pretext to have to work on my mail from the goblins, I took Matthew's letter and returned to the living room. Harry, I'd rather talk to you in person, but this is a matter that can't be delayed. You know that Melissa and I weren't thrilled about your and Daphne's traveling arrangements when we met in San Francisco, but we decided to let it be, because it never occurred to us that they'd become public. Unfortunately, that has happened. By now, Daphne must have taught you enough about pureblood customs that you'll know what the only honorable course of action has to be for you. I know that Daphne has a rebel Liu's streak when it comes to the traditions of her circles, but I trust that you are honorable and sensible enough to prevent her from the repercussions of her ill choices. Yours, Matthew. I grimaced inwardly. Now I could imagine what kind of pressure Daphne was under from her cousin. It made me appreciate it even more that she still was with me. Was it right of us to wait for the perfect moment to get engaged? Shouldn't we do it right now to take the pressure off of Daphne? I propped up my elbows on the desk and took my head between my hands. My gut feeling told me to wait, but the Gryffindor in me felt compelled to do the noble thing. When Daphne came in from the veranda and asked me to have lunch with her, I still hadn't come to a decision. Was that Matthew's handwriting I saw on one of your letters? She asked when we sat down with our sandwiches at one of the small tables outside of the Lido Cafe. Yes, I replied, unwilling to lie to her. She gave me a sharp look over her sandwich. Harry, about what you said earlier, we set the pace, remember? Not Cousin Matthew. Yes, love. I grinned at her, but even I know it was a weak grin. Don't you forget it, she warned and bit into her sandwich. HPDG. The Princess Isabella reached Singapore, then headed to Port Klang, and after that to Penang. For 3 days in a row Daphne and I didn't think of touching the banish box and letting the outside world get in our way. For 3 blessed days we were able to pretend we were just another young couple in love, and not Daphne Greengrass, head of House Greengrass and member of the Sacred 28. And Harry Potter, Chosen One, Savior of the Light, and a dozen more silly monikers, who had every eye of the magical world turned on them. Of course, Skeeter's interview in the Daily Prophet had brought both Daphne and me another round of howlers. They were mostly from witches who were disappointed that I was off the market, so to speak, and wanted to convey our displeasure to Daphne or me or even both of us. Though their behavior was vexing, it was harmless. To my relief, the goblins hadn't filtered out any more potential dangerous mail to Daphne. All of that was far from our minds as we ambled alongside the Swan Lake of Singapore Botanic Garden. Compared to the activities we normally chose for our excursions, it was a rather tame way to spend our day, but Daphne obviously loved it. It was amazing how much she knew about plants. When we came to the healing garden, she was able to identify the plants on exhibition and tell me about their properties. You're as good as Neville when it comes to herbology. I complimented her. Daphne, quite adorably, scrunched up her nose. Almost. He beat me by 1 point when we took the OWLs. But you're right. Herbology is my best subject and I'd love to do something related to that after I've got my NEWTs. Unfortunately, managing Greengrass shipping and being on the Wizengamot will take up most of my time. Of course I also want to have time for my family, in case I'll have one. I wouldn't worry about that, I replied and pulled her closer towards me. I'm sure you'll have a family one day. Daphne smiled and kissed my cheek. I don't, love. When we continued our walk, she leaned her head against my shoulders and said, I am an only child. That makes for a rather lonesome childhood, and I've always dreamt about having siblings. Single quote. Me, too, I admitted and dropped a kiss on her head. 2 or 3 children would be nice, she daydreamed. Or 4, I agreed. That earned me a sharp elbow in the side. Hold your hippogriffs. You don't have to pop them out, mister. We laughed, and the size of our future family wasn't discussed any longer when we walked to the food canopy for a sandwich. And fresh juice before we explored the National Orchid Garden. Later in the afternoon we took a taxi to Raffles Hotel. We'd promised to meet the Mehans in the long bar for a drink. Alvira and Daphne both had a Singapore Sling. A drink that had been invented at Raffles Hotel. Willie and I didn't trust our ability to deal with an alcoholic drink in the hot and humid climate of Singapore, and opted for the non-alcoholic version. That earned us some teasing from our significant others. Someone has to stay sober and make sure you get back on board in time, Willie told them serenely and took a sip of his Virgin Sling. Of course, he and I had been right. Alvira and Daphne both were rather tipsy on the short taxi drive back to the Princess Isabella. Back in our suite, Daphne went straight to the sofa and dropped down. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes. Just a minute and I'll be ready to take a shower, she murmured. I grinned and went into the walk-in wardrobe to get fresh clothes for the evening. When I returned, Daphne was sound asleep, so I decided to take advantage of that and hit the shower before her. She was still asleep when I came back, and didn't wake up when Butler brought the customary champagne and pralines to our suite. I decided to let her sleep it off and settled down on the Sun Island with my mystery novel and a glass of champagne, while the Princess Isabella left Singapore. The sun had already set in the west in a stunning display of reds, golds and oranges, and Singapore was far behind us when Daphne finally woke up and came out onto the veranda. The chain of lights that spanned the Princess Isabella from the bow to the stern cast a faint light onto the veranda, and I had long ago put my book to the side. Don't you dare say, I told you so. She warned me and snuggled up to me, stifling a yawn. Merlin, I'm still tired. I put my arm around her shoulder so she could lean against me more comfortably. I'd never do that, I replied, suppressing a laugh. Good for you. Daphne yawned. Right, I'll have a shower and then I'll go to bed. She announced and got off the Sun Island. At the door, she stopped and threw a saucy look over her shoulder. Don't you want to join me, love? I didn't have to be told twice. DG. As nice as our co-travelers were, especially Alvira and Willie, they were also much older than us. Daphne and I had found out that we had more fun if it was only the two of us and we didn't have to be considerate of the restrictions of elderly people. That's why we ventured out to explore Kuala Lumpur on our own. Instead of joining the sedate tour offered by the cruise company. The first stop was at the newly completed Petronas Twin Towers. Our taxi driver managed to drop us off as close as possible. Daphne and I looked up at the towers that loomed in front of us. Wow, Daphne breathed. They are tall, aren't they? They're the tallest buildings in the world, I replied. We had pre-ordered, skip-the-lines tickets. Obtained by the cruise company for us, so Daphne and I were able to walk past the long lines in front of the ticket counters and at once enter one of the elevators that would bring us to the spectacular skybridge that connected the two towers. The elevator ride up to the skybridge on the 41st floor was fast, almost as fast as accelerating on my beloved Firebolt, and I felt a huge grin spread over my face. Daphne, however, got slightly green in the face. It's as if you're catapulted up, but your stomach stays behind, she groaned, clinging to my arm. I put my arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. When we're back home, I'll get myself a new broom and then I'll show you what real fun is, I whispered in her ear. The look she gave me in return could have turned tear to ice on the spot on this hot and humid Malaysian morning. I can hardly wait, she deadpanned. I was still sniggering to myself when the elevator stopped and let us out on the skybridge. We were 170 meters above the ground, and the view from here onto the streets below us and the towers on each side of the skybridge was stunning. As always, Daphne needed some time to get used to the height, but as soon as she'd overcome her fear, she had as much fun as I did. We were allowed to remain on the skybridge for 10 minutes to take photos and enjoy the view, before we were ushered back to the elevator. Another stomach-turning ride brought us up to the observation deck on level 86. From here, we had a 360-degree view over Kuala Lumpur. Unfortunately, it was a hazy day, so the view was somewhat limited. But we still had an impressive view from the pinnacle of the first tower. Daphne asked a Canadian tourist to take a picture of the two of us with the pinnacle in the background, which glinted in the early morning sun. We barely had time to take the photo before we were quickly ushered back to the elevator. The tour ended at the obligatory gift shop, but we weaved our way through the customers and the offers. When we stepped out of the building, we discovered Kuala Lumpur Convention Centre Park. It was like a green oasis in the hustle and bustle of the amazingly modern Malaysian capital. So we decided to take a stroll through the park and escape the heat and humidity of the city. The park offered pleasant, shady walks and a fascinating and unusual view on the skyline of Kuala Lumpur. We ambled along the lake, holding hands. "It reminds me of walking through New York Central Park," Daphne remarked when we looked back at the Petronas Twin Towers. "You've been there?" I asked. "Quite often, actually. Whenever Mum took me to New York, we took the time to visit the park," she replied and smiled at the memory, though her eyes were sad. This was new. Usually, she'd tear up when ever something reminded her of her mother, and needed some time to compose herself. As if she'd read my thoughts, she said softly, "It's got better, you know. Thanks to you I don't feel as if I'm all alone in the world anymore." Our eyes met and I leaned closer to kiss her, but jumped when a fat raindrop hit my nose. Daphne giggled. Another raindrop fell on her nose, and she shrieked. Before we knew what happened, the skies opened and we were hit by a veritable downpour. Laughing, we ran for shelter to the entrance of the Kuala Lumpur Convention Centre. Since it didn't look like it would stop raining anytime soon, we decided to take a look around. Doing so allowed us to discover the aquarium at KLCC. What started as a way to pass time until the rain stopped ended with a fascinating tour of the underwater world. From the misty highlands along the riverbanks and out into the deep ocean. Daphne and I hadn't seen anything like that before and were fascinated. Daphne fell in love with the playful Asian otter. "I'd love to have one as a familiar," she smiled. "Merlin, help us," I replied as we walked to the next exhibition. "Can you imagine the havoc these little critters could create?" "Yeah, but it would be quite amusing," she replied. "Not in my house." I put my foot down, and we both laughed. The highlight of the aquarium surely was the long underwater tunnel where sharks swam over our heads. We had a front row look of their jaws with the murderous teeth. Daphne shuddered and huddled against me. "Do you still want to go shark diving in Cape Town, Harry?" "Yes," I admitted while I followed the graceful movements of the predator above my head with my eyes. You can't deny that they are fascinating animals. Point taken, Daphne conceded, though I could see by the doubtful expression on her face that she was not at all convinced. She perked up when we reached the sea turtles though, and was mesmerized by the aqua theater, a huge glass panel in front of a gigantic water tank with schools of fish floating behind. When we finally resurfaced from the ocean to solid ground, it was already lunchtime. We decided we'd seen enough of KLCC and that it was time to explore the rest of the city. One of our co-travelers had recommended the Central Market, and we took a taxi to get there. Central Market was a recently renovated, two-story Art Deco building that offered an abundance of shops selling clothes, jewelry, traditional batik prints and other handicrafts. "It's like walking through Aladdin's cave," I remarked as we made our way to the food court on the second floor. And promptly had to explain the fairy tale of Aladdin to Daphne during lunch. The small restaurant had been a recommendation of our taxi driver. The owner was one of his cousins, who served us a fantastic chicken rice, which was a local speciality, as he told us. "It's fantastic," Daphne said and took another bite of the crispy, yet tender chicken. "Absolutely," I agreed and wiped my mouth with my napkin. "I never had the opportunity to try exotic food when I was living with the Dursleys," I told her and took a sip of my Coke. "My uncle would rather have starved than to eat foreign muck, as he phrased it. My aunt could hardly persuade him to have Italian food when they had guests. It was only because his beloved Dutters was hooked on pizza and spaghetti that he tolerated it." She gave me a thoughtful glance. "Harry, have you seen your relatives at all after the war?" I evaded her eyes and shook my head. No. What's the use in that? There's no love lost between us. The less we see of each other, the better off we all are. Her soft hand grabbed mine and she linked her fingers with mine. You're filled with bitterness, love, and that's understandable. But I think you ought to talk to them one last time. You need closure. Harry, for your own sake. Still avoiding her eyes, I grumbled at that. She squeezed my hand. Think about it. Then she pulled her hand away and changed the topic. Any idea what to do for the remainder of the day? I did not, but I did have the good sense to ask the owner of the restaurant. He recommended Perdana Botanical Garden with the Kuala Lumpur Bird Park. It was within walking distance of the Central Market, and equipped with the directions the friendly owner of the restaurant had given us. We left Central Market and walked to Perdana Botanical Garden. It turned out to be a huge park in the middle of Kuala Lumpur. The aviaries of the bird park were enormous, allowing the birds to fly over our heads and around us while we walked through the beautifully landscaped park. Daphne laughed out loud when she discovered the Indian peacock. Doesn't he look like Malfoy? Just as conceited and vain. Yeah, but I still liked him best as a bouncing ferret, I agreed. She had a point. Though, the way the peacock strutted over the path in front of us bore a strong resemblance to Malfoy when he strutted through the halls of Hogwarts. I wonder if he's still strutting around, I mused. I doubt that, Daphne replied and linked her arm with mine. Last thing I heard of him was that he was placed under house arrest by the ministry to wait for his trial. Don't remind me, I grimaced. Kingsley wrote me the other day that the trials would all begin in May, after Memorial Week. I'm a witness in quite a lot of them. She leaned her head against my shoulder. Then let's not think about it now, Harry. The remnants of the war will catch up with us as soon as we're back home. Let it not spoil the last few weeks of the cruise. I agreed, and Malfoy and the war weren't mentioned for the rest of the day. Instead, we visited the parrot aviary and were allowed to feed the colorful birds that were so trusting, or greedy, that they settled down on our shoulders to get better access to the treats. The tour ended with a visit to the impressive hornbills that were native to Asia. I'm spent, Daphne said when we left the last aviary. The heat and humidity had become worse after lunch. A long, cold shower would be nice, I agreed. Or a long swim, Daphne suggested. I don't know about you, but I've seen enough of Kuala Lumpur. Why don't we return to the ship and make good use of the pool as long as the other passengers are still sightseeing? We hailed a taxi that brought us back to Port Klang's cruise terminal. Daphne had been right, the pool was deserted. And we had a refreshing time in the water. After that we settled down on the Sun Island on the veranda of our suite with a cold Coke. While the cruise terminal was in an industrial area that didn't offer much to look at, the view on the other side looked out on an island covered with dense mangrove woods, and we watched the sun slowly disappear behind the woods. DG. Penang was as hot and humid as Kuala Lumpur. While most of the elderly passengers had opted to educate themselves on a tour visiting the historical Georgetown and the Buddhist temples, Daphne and I had decided that we had enough of sightseeing and needed a relaxed day on the beach. A boat picked us up at the pier for a 30-minute ride over crystal clear waters to Monkey Beach. We were the only passengers today, which was a nice surprise. The boat trip alone was already worth it. The skipper and his friend asked us if we'd like to fish. Neither Daphne nor I had ever fished before, and of course we were curious to try out something new. The fish there must have been really hungry, because within a few minutes Daphne and I both had caught 2 fish for our barbecue lunch. Good for you, or you'd have stayed hungry today. Daphne quipped and kissed me. There are always the coconuts on the palm trees, I fired back with equal humor. For the remainder of the boat trip we took a seat in the stern of the boat and enjoyed the scenery. Especially the abundant wildlife. We saw a couple of sea eagles on the hunt, and once even a fish otter popped its head out of the water near the boat. Monkey Beach turned out to be a crescent beach on an uninhabited island. A barbecue area had been put up for the tourists, and a couple of hammocks swung in the light sea breeze in the shade of some huge trees. There wasn't much to do here except swimming and lazing, but the warm sea breeze brought a welcomed relief from the heat and humidity of the Malaysian climate. Perfect, Daphne exclaimed and hugged me. We had a long swim, goofing around in the tepid water like small children. After that, we made ourselves comfortable in the hammocks, reading and dozing. Ever so often Daphne would reach out with her hand and touch me, giving me a soft smile while she did so. In spite of our laziness, the morning passed quickly, and we were both amazed when our guides called out to us that lunch was ready. Lunch was simple, yet excellent, with an amazing variety of food. Besides the fish we'd caught in the morning, we were also served prawns, satay, sausages, chops and chicken, together with a simple salad and followed by fresh fruit. "I wish I could stay here forever," Daphne said, leaned against my chest, as we sat in the shade of a tree after lunch. "No relatives or, well-meaning, friends, no one here to harass us." "Yeah, that sounds too good to be true," I agreed and dropped a kiss on the top of her head. "Unfortunately, my love, you as well as I have obligations outside of this island. Nay, Thayer Greengrass Shipping nor the Potter Holdings are going to manage themselves, not to mention our seats on the Wizengamot. I'd hate to see those dunderheads once again destroy everything I've been fighting for. Spoil sport," she pouted. I laughed and hugged her closer to me, while we enjoyed our siesta in the shade until it was time to return back to the Princess Isabella. HPDG. The next morning we were brought back to reality in form of the buzzing banishing box when we returned from breakfast. "Throw it overboard, Harry," Daphne exclaimed theatrically. She dropped down on the sofa and covered her ears with her hands. I laughed at her and tapped with the wand against the box to get our mail. The laughter died on my lips when I found 3 letters from Ginny in the box. "What the?" I cursed. Daphne gave me a mock reproachful look. However, the expletive she used when I handed her another letter from Melissa made me whistle appreciatively. My, I'd never have thought all. Hear a proper pureblood girl use such foul language. I grinned. She ignored me and tore the letter open. "Melissa is furious that I refused to return to England," she told me after she'd read it. "Well, anything else would have been a surprise," I replied, while I sat down at the desk and opened the letters I'd received from my financial advisors. "Yeah, but," she trailed off abruptly. I looked up from my letter and noticed her worrying her lower lip between her teeth, always a sign that something was bothering her. "What's the matter, love?" I asked. "Melissa wrote that she'll have to take action if I refuse to come back to England and live with them." "I'm worried what she'll do," Daphne replied. "What can she do? You're a grown-up woman and head of House Greengrass. I'd say it would be difficult for her to get you to do something you don't want to do," I tried to comfort her. "You're probably right," she agreed, but didn't sound convinced. "Aren't you curious what the Weaselet wrote to you?" That was as evident a diversionary tactic as there could be one, but I decided to let it go for the time being. She would talk to me after coming to grips with Melissa's letter, I was sure. She wouldn't make the same mistake she'd made after the ball again. "Not at all," I told her. "There'll be time enough for that nonsense after I've finished to deal with the things I really need to take care of. I've promised my girlfriend to let her beat me at shuffleboard this afternoon." HPDG. I stuck to my word. After I'd fulfilled my duties to the Potter Holdings, Daphne and I went to lunch and afterwards joined a hot shuffleboard competition, together with the Mehans. The competition ended at the pool bar, and it was already late in the afternoon when we returned to the suite. "That was fun," Daphne exclaimed and made herself comfortable on the Sun Island. "Absolutely." I agreed and motioned to join her, but she kept me from that. "What about the letters from the Weaselet?" Of course I'd forgot about them. And I groaned. "Must I really read them?" "It's always good to know what the enemy is thinking," Daphne replied. "You're exaggerating, Daphne," I said over my shoulder as I went back into the living room to get Ginny's letters from my desk. "I don't consider Ginny as my enemy." "I wouldn't be so sure about that," Daphne called after me. "At least not as long as you do. Intino who gave that love potion to you." I grabbed the letters and returned to the veranda. "We aren't even sure that I was given a love potion," I reminded her. "It's an assumption we made, based on the symptoms have shown." "True. But call it a gut feeling, I just know they did something to you." Daphne replied and made room for me when I sat down on the Sun Island. "Where have you left your Slytherin brain?" I shook my head at her. "Acting on assumptions and gut feelings is usually my part. You're supposed to be the voice of logic here." She laughed at that and gave me a kiss on the cheek. "I admit that I'm a bit prejudiced when it comes to the Weaselet." I'd never have noticed that if you hadn't mentioned it, I quipped while I opened the letters. That earned me a slap on the arm. Prat. Yes. But you love me nevertheless, I replied and kissed her. Don't think you can put off the inevitable by distracting me. Daphne told me. What has she written? I sighed, and sorted the 3 letters by the date. Then I started reading. The blush crept into my cheeks after I read the first few sentences, and I shifted in my seat. What has you so flustered, Harry? Daphne asked. Ooked up from the letter into her concerned eyes. Ginny describes in great detail our first time. Only, I never touched her that way, I swear. Daphne's brows furrowed. You already said aft. Her last letter that she's lost the connection to reality when it comes to you. Is this along the same lines? Even worse. But see for yourself. I replied and gave her the letter. She started reading. The frown never left her face. Though she also blushed fiercely. Contrary to me, she managed to read the whole letter. That's damned porn, she exclaimed after she'd finished and put the letter beside her, wiping her fingers at her chinos as if she'd touched something dirty. Are the other 2 letters also like that? I hadn't had the courage to read them yet, but now did a quick scan. Yep, I confirmed. She's describing the following days in them. The deep frown still not had left Daphne's face, and I was starting to get worried. I swear, Daphne, nothing of that is true. She looked up at me. Her face brightening with laughter. You don't have to tell me that, Harry. Some of the things she describes are physically impossible. We both burst out laughing. The laughter cleared away the tension I'd felt. I reached out for the letters again. Let's put them where they belong, in the dustbin. But Daphne held me back. Wait, Harry, you'd better not throw them away, but collect them. I've got a feeling that this is only the beginning of something rather nasty. Daphne's feeling turned out be right. The next morning brought another letter from Ginny. I turned it in my hand over and over again. Not sure what I should do with it. Open it, Harry, and get it over with. Daphne advised. I grimaced. I don't want to lose my breakfast. Wimp. She replied and took the letter from me with a soft kiss on my cheek. She tore it open and quickly scanned it. It's about the same as the others, she told me. You'll be happy to know that your performance was incredible, Harry. She looked up and grinned at me. I puffed my chest, and we both laughed. I'll put it with the other letters, Daphne announced. At least Cousin Melissa left us in peace for today. For the rest of the day we ignored our problems. I started working with the dossiers Daphne had prepared for me about the current members of the Wizengamot. She'd pointed out that 26 of the 60 seats still bellow NGED to members of the Sacred 28. Coincidentally, many of them were also Death Eaters. Quite a lot of them had been killed or captured after the Battle of Hogwarts. That gave me an idea. What are you doing there? Daphne asked, looking over my shoulder. I try to strip off a few votes from the dark fraction of the Wizengamot, I told her. She snorted. Good luck with that. I'd say hell. We'll freeze over before the dark families will change their tunes. They don't need to change their tunes. I'm after their seats, I replied. That got her attention. She pulled a chair up to the desk and sat down beside me. How is that possible? Actually, it's something you told me when we talked about the black seat. You said a seat can be revoked if the inhabitant is found guilty of the murder or attempted murder of a witch or wizard, I explained. She at once grasped what I was after. You would think that most Death Eaters are guilty of a murder or two. That's brilliant, Harry. She gave me a peck on the cheek. Let's see. Who are the possible candidates? She pulled the list I was just working on towards her. Those are the members of the Dark Fraction, I told her. Avery, Bulstrode, Burke, Caro, Crabbe, Crouch, Dolohov, Flint, Goyle, Knott, Parkinson, Roper, Roll, Selwyn, Travers and Yaxley. Let's see, Avery is a Death Eater, and he got caught during the Battle of Hogwarts. Even if they can't prove he committed a murder, he should at least go to Azkaban for life, so that Minister Shacklebolt can replace him by a proxy of his choice, she mused. He doesn't have an heir. So after his death the seat can be claimed by the ministry, as long as there isn't an heir lurking in the sidelines. Although I doubt that, the Averys are not very well liked, even in pureblood circles. And always had problems to find wives for their sons. One down. I grinned and kissed her temple. You won't have any success with the Bulstrodes and the Burkes, Daphne told me. They are sympathizers, sure. But they are too cunning to have joined the ranks of Voldemort. You won't find any dirt to throw at them, Harry. They're famous for always covering their tracks. I crossed the two names out. Not every raffle ticket is a winner. She laughed at that. Who's next? The Carrows. Daphne shuddered. You'd think that they'll at least stay in Azkaban for the rest of their lives, with everything they did at Hogwarts. But I'm sure they'll also be found guilty of a murder or two, if you dig deep enough. What's the next name on your list? Crabbe. That should be a no-brainer. Craw. BBE Sr. was killed by Kingsley few weeks before the battle, and Crabbe Jr. died during the battle in the fiendfire he conjured to kill Hermione, Ron and me, I said. Her head shot up, and I saw the terror in her eyes. Fiendfire. She almost shouted. Hush, love, it's over and we escaped without a scratch, I tried to calm her. Without any success, of course. I'll let it go for now, but you'll tell me everything about that, soon. Harry. She stated. I knew an order when I got one, so I only replied, yes, ma'am, which earned me a poke in the side. Ignoring my snigger, Daphne asked, why is the Crouch seat on your list? Barty Crouch was a pompous ass, but never a Death Eater. That's true for Barty Crouch Sr., but not for his son. Since Barty Jr. murdered his father, and A.L.S.O. played a major role in the resurrection of Voldemort, the Ministry should at least be able to take his seat for the rest of his life, I explained. Daphne frowned. How is that possible? Barty Junio R. was sentenced for life after the First War and died in Azkaban a couple of years later. I sighed and ran a hand through my hair. That's the official story. However, he managed to escape from Azkaban. And around the time his death was reported, his dying mother took his place, and his father held him prisoner in his house until he managed to escape from there and to return to Voldemort. He was the nay responsible for putting my name into the Goblet of Fire and for taking me directly to Voldemort after the third task. She gaped at me for a full minute, until I put my hand under her chin and gently closed her mouth shut. Daphne grabbed my wrist. Will you tell me about that one day? She asked, her eyes dark and troubled. Yes, but we'll need a lot of time and a bottle of whiskey for that. At the moment, I want to get this finished. I gestured at the papers in front of me. If you don't mind waiting, I'll tell you tonight. Daphne nodded, still looking troubled. She looked at my list. Dolohov should also be a no-brainer. As you call it, he's one of the worst. I agree. Though Flint will be tough. I'm not even sure their head of house took the dark mark. I'd be surprised if he did. Daphne replied and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. The Flints are slippery bastards, very much like the Burkes and Bulstrodes. They'd never do something that will cost them their privileges. What a pity. But we can try, can't we? I said and put the Flint name to my list. At least Goyle should be easy. Both Goyles, father and son, took the dark mark and are on the run. Goyle Jr. was part of the attack on Hermione. Ron and I when Crabbe tried to grill us. Don't joke about that, Harry. Daphne admonished and slapped me lightly on the arm. You could have died. True, but I didn't. I replied and blew her a kiss. Daphne sighed and shook her head, mumbling something that sounded like, Gryffindor. Ignoring my obviously irritated girlfriend, I moved on with my list. No. TT fought on our side in the Battle of Hogwarts, or so I've been told. Though his father definitely was a Death Eater and died during the battle, I don't want to tell Kingsley to investigate him. Old look as if we didn't want to acknowledge that Not Junior fought with us and might turn him away to the wrong people. Good to know you can think like a Slytherin if you need to, Daphne quipped. Your reasoning is sound. Leave Theodore to me. I think I can persuade him to join the neutral fraction. That'll secure his vote at least for some of the legislation Minister Shacklebolt wants to push through. All right. Not as all yours, love, I grinned and gave her a peck on the lips. What about Parkinson? I'm positive they are sympathizers, but like many others they were smart enough not to get too involved. I doubt you'll catch them, but you can try. All right. I scribbled another name on my list. Roper. Blood supremacists, but never in league with Voldemort, Daphne replied decidedly. They are a haughty bunch. But no Death Eaters. But Roll, Selwyn, Travers and Yaxley all were, I remarked. Even if Kingsley can't take away their seats, he can at least appoint a proxy of his choice for their lifetime. That gives us 8, 10 possible votes for the time being. 11. If you manage to persuade not to join the neutral fraction. Not bad, I'd say. Daphne stood up and stepped behind me. Not bad. With these votes you've got the majority for Minister Shacklebolt in the bag, Harry. She slid her arms around me and kissed me on the cheek. I turned my head to meet her lips. True, I said after a while. But let's not forget that most of these votes go to proxies for a limited period of time and have to be returned to their families after that. If we want to get the neutral fraction and the light fraction a secure majority for many years, we need to do more than that. We need to get the seats that are now held by proxy by the ministry. We need to find the remaining heirs, if there are any. Daphne looked thoughtful. Maybe we should ask the Muggleborns we know and those with close Muggleborn relatives to take the hereditary test, though it's awfully expensive. How much? I asked. About 10,000 galleons per test, she replied. I let out a low whistle. 10,000 galleons amounted to £1 million, much more than most Muggleborns could lay their hands on. From my classmates, probably only Justin Finch Fletchley could pay that much. I turned around and pulled Daphne in my lap. She let out a surprised shriek, but then made herself see comfortable with a giggle and put her arms around my neck. What are you scheming, Harry? She asked. I'm not scheming, I'm only weighing my options, I corrected her, and slid my arms around her waist. Daphne snorted at that. Sorry, love, but I'm a Slytherin and I can sense someone scheming from a mile away. What are you up to? Out with it. How many Muggleborns do you know, Daphne? Huh. My question obviously puzzled her. But she replied, in our year there was no one in my house, Granger and Thomas in Gryffindor and Finch Fletchley in Hufflepuff. That's all I know. I know of Katie Bell, Elle and the Creevy brothers, Colin and Dennis, from Gryffindor. Also, my mother was Muggleborn, and your cousin Matthew is also of Muggleborn descent. She suddenly realized what I intended. If they took the hereditary test, we might find some of the missing heirs of the seats the ministry has usurped. But none of them can afford the test. But I can. Call it a donation to rebuild our society. I replied. HP, DG. The Princess Isabella reached Colombo, Sri Lanka the next day. Once again we had to wake up at an unholy early hour to be ready to get on land as soon as the gangway was lowered. Buses were already waiting to drive us to Kandy, which was on our agenda today. The ride was more than 3 hours long and was very hot. We reached Kandy at around 11 in the morning, and first had a tour of the botanical garden. Again, Daphne was in her element, pointing out every plant to me. The garden had an impressive collection of bamboo plants, and a large part of it looked as if it was still undisturbed jungle. From the botanical garden it was only a short walk over a suspension bridge to New Ranwelly Spice and Herbal Garden. It was really strange to see all the spices I'd used cooking for the Dursleys grow in their natural habitat. I had even more fun to explain to Daphne how the different spices are used in the kitchen. Nutmeg is great in mashed potatoes, I told her with a grin. I don't have an idea how to cook mashed potatoes, so I'll take your word for it, Daphne replied. Well, love, that can be easily mended. Since you asked so nicely about it, I'll teach you how to cook when we're back home. I grinned, turning the tables on her. After all the torture I'd been through with learning how to dance and all the long dinners at the captain's table, I deserved some payback. I didn't ask you to show me how to cook. Daphne protested. Love, I'm sure I just heard you complain that you can't cook, I replied serenely. I never complained, she exclaimed. When she saw my grinning face, she burst out laughing. All right, I get it. I had that coming, didn't I? You'll get your payback, Harry, although you'll need strong nerves for that. I can't even prepare tea without burning the water. I surreptitiously cast an anti-listening charm around us. The more reason to learn how it's done, especially since you don't have house elves anymore. You've got a point there, she conceded. After the tour I bought some nutmeg, cinnamon, pepper and vanilla at the small shop. The fragrance of the spices had always fascinated me when I had been cooking for the Dursleys. So I just couldn't resist taking with me some of the riches the island offered. The morning ended with a short stroll through Kandy Market Hall. We'd already got a glimpse of Asian markets in Saigon and Kuala Lumpur. But the market hall in Kandy beat them both. Located on 2 floors, it was an onslaught on all senses. It offered an abundance of food and spices, clothing and jewelry, toys. And souvenirs, most of them handcrafted, and a million of other things people might need. The multitude of colors was so overwhelming it almost hurt the eyes. The fragrance of spices and tropical fruits mixed with the odor of too many people in a confined space, and the noise was deafening. We had lunch at a hotel in Kandy. Everyone was glad for the break, and especially the cool drinks we were offered. Though Kandy was situated much higher in altitude than Colombo and the climate was supposed to be more pleasant, the temperature was still in the high 20s Celsius, not to mention the high humidity. In the afternoon we visited the royal palace with the Temple of the Sacred Tooth, a relic of Buddha. Unfortunately, part of the temple was under reconstruction after its main entrance gate had been destroyed during a bomb blast only a few months ago, an uncomfortable reminder of the still ongoing civil war in parts of Sri Lanka. We were allowed some free time at the palace before we were ushered back to the buses for the long ride to Colombo. Daphne and I put it to good use and took a short stroll along the Kandy Lake. The ride back to Colombo was even hotter and longer than the ride in the morning. The route was packed with traffic and seemed to be blocked at every corner. The bus offered no air conditioning, but at least a refrigerator filled to the brim with cold drinks, and we made good use of it. The stop-and-go traffic and the heat were tiring, and soon Daphne started to yawn. Her arm slid around my waist, and her head dropped on my shoulder. I put my arm around her to make her more comfortable, and the next minute she dozed off. I saw how our travel guide from the cruise company constantly checked his wristwatch and frowned. I'd also checked my watch and estimated the distance we still had to cover. There was no way we were going to make it back in time for the scheduled departure of the Princess Isabella. We were lucky that this was an excursion organized by the cruise company. And about 2/3 of the passengers had partaken in this, so that the ship was forced to wait for us. Daphne woke up about 20 minutes later. Did I miss something? Nothing of importance, I replied. A couple of elephants slowly walking ahead of us and blocking the street, a lorry that was unloaded blocking the street, Thanks, I get the picture. She interrupted me. She stifled a yawn. Gosh, I'm knackered and hungry. And I want a shower. Me too, I agreed and dropped a kiss on her head. I don't think I have the energy to change and go to the restaurant for dinner when we're back. What do you think about dinner at the suite? Sounds fine to me, she replied and snuggled up to me. First a shower, then dinner in front of the telly with a nice DVD. How about Back to the Future? The suite came with an impressive collection of DVDs. Daphne and I had made good use of it during those first depressing days after the death of her mother, but when we reached warmer climates and Daphne got far enough over her loss to go out again, we'd spent less time in front of the telly of our suite in the evenings. Perfect, I said and leaned my head against hers. It had become dark outside. And together we watched how the bus painfully slow-threaded its way through the traffic to the harbor. Finally, we reached the Princess Isabella, more than half an hour behind schedule. When we climbed out of the bus, we could see the captain and his officers standing just outside of the bridge, ready to lift anchor as soon as the last passenger had entered the ship. Daphne and I were still on our way to our suite when we felt the ship already moving out of port. We called out a good night to Alvira and Willie, who also had a suite on deck 10, and LLED to our own suite at the end of the hallway hand in hand. We were alone in the hallway, and when we neared the door of our suite, I felt the hairs at the back of my head stand up. I halted my steps at once. Is something wrong, Harry? Daphne asked me, a frown on her face. Though I had become slightly paranoid after the war and still lived under the protection of the Fidelius charm at Grimald Place, I had refrained from using any of the protection charms we'd used during our time on the run on our suite. I was afraid how the workings of the ship would react to permanent wards. In fact, Daphne and I hardly used magic because of that, except the odd sunscreen charm. They were so low-powered they couldn't do any harm. But what I now sensed from the entrance door of our suite were some Arthur skillfully placed alarm charms and muggle-repelling charms. Yeah, I replied grimly. We've got uninvited visitors, love. Daphne paled. Death Eaters, she whispered. I gently pulled her back in to the hallway, which was still empty, away from the door to our suite. All our co-travelers had been in a hurry to return to their cabins to have a shower and dinner, just like us. Unfortunately, it didn't look as if Daphne and I were going to have either of that any time soon. I slipped my wand out of my invisible holster and cast a silent anti-listening charm around us. No, not Death Eaters, I told her. The wards I detected have the feel of Hermione's magic to them. I walked through her wards for more times than I can remember when we were on the run, so I know how they feel. Her eyes went wide. Granger, she exclaimed. What, by Merlin's unmentionables, does she want? The color of her cheeks deepened, and her eyes sparkled with anger. Well, I suppose she wants to save me fro. M.A. gold-digging dark pureblood who got me under her spell by the generous use of love potions, I deadpanned. Unfortunately, where Hermione is, Ron usually isn't far away, and I'm really not in the mood to deal with his immature tantrums tonight. In spite of her anger, Daphne had to laugh. How noble of her. What are we going to do? First, we'll make sure if I was right, I replied. I turned to the door and cast one of the nifty detection spells on our suite Hermione had taught me during our time on the run. Hominium Revelio. The result was a surprise. 3 people, I told Daphne. They're on the lounge sofa. 3. She was taken aback. Who? Ginny, of course, I interrupted her. My best friends and my ex unite for a rescue mission after they've found out I have a new girlfriend they don't approve of. Touching, isn't it? However, she doesn't consider herself as your ex, and that worries me, Daphne reminded me. What do we do about them? We can't stay in the hallway forever. I'm hungry and I want a shower. She sounded slightly miffed and I couldn't blame her for that. I was also hungry, and after the long and hot ride from Candy to Columbo, my shirt was sticking to my back uncomfortably. I really wasn't in the mood to deal with a delusional ex, her hot-tempered brother and a Hermione who was surely in one of her holier-than-thou moods, if her last letter was an indication. I scratched the back of my neck. It depends on what they want. If they want to talk, let's get it over with and then send them back. But if they think I'm under your undue influence and came to do something about that, this is going to be ugly. Granger's the brain. The weasels used to follow her lead. She doesn't strike me as the violent type, so they'll probably want to talk first. Probably. But don't get deceived by Hermione's bookish ways. She can be ruthless if need be. Also, don't underestimate Ginny. Her temper is always a force to reckon with, and I'm quite sure T's become more volatile than ever before in her current state of mind. Daphne worried her lower lip between her teeth. What if I walk into the living room, feign surprise, and try to talk to them? While you take the route through the bathroom and the bedroom to get into their backs. That way we'll find out what they want, but still have the surprise element on our side. I didn't like this plan, and rightfully protested. I hate to use you as bait, love. She gave me an annoyed look. I'm not a porcelain doll, Harry. I know that I'm probably in for a hex or two, but I can handle that. I'm counting on you to take on all 3 of them. Don't get your hopes high, love. They've all fought before. I'm not sure that I'll have a chance if I have to go against all 3 of them, I warned her. Daphne looked as frustrated as I felt. Oh well, but it's our best bet, isn't it? Unfortunately. I put my arms around her and kissed her. Be careful, love. You, too, she replied and gave me a peck on the lips. Then she squared her shoulders and walked to the door of our suite. I followed her, casting a silencing charm on myself. Daphne took a deep breath, then she opened the door to our suite. I was right on her heels, but immediately ducked into the bathroom to my right. I followed up the silencing charm with a disillusionment charm, while cursing myself for my short-sightedness. My invisibility cloak was safely packed away in my old school trunk at Grimmauld Place, where I had put it before I left for Southampton. I never would have thought that I would have need of it during a Muggle cruise. From the living room came the indistinct murmur of voices. I thought I heard Ron's angry voice, and flitted to the door at the other end of the bathroom that led into the bedroom. To cover the noise of the opening door, I cast another silencing charm on it before I opened it. My heart beat like a drum in my chest. I was worried about Daphne. Heaven knew what Ginny would do to her if she got into one of her tantrums. Ron sure as hell wouldn't hold his sister back. We would be lucky if he didn't join her on a hexing spree. Hermione alone simply didn't have the power to hold back 2 enraged Weasleys. No one had. I thought grimly while I inched the door open. They tended to shout and hex first and ask questions later, when the damage was done and most likely irreparable. It had Taken me several months of therapy to discover that character trait of my former surrogate family wasn't compatible with my own reserved character. However fascinated I was with their liveliness and the love they shared for each other. Deep down their horrible temper made me uncomfortable and I tended to cringe and withdraw into myself whenever I had to witness it. Prime example of that had been my reaction to Ron and Hermione's fight during our third year. The bedroom was empty, as I had expected. It wasn't big. There was just enough room for the king-sized bed, a bedside table on each side of it, and a small dressing table at one side of the room. I had never had use for it, but ever since Daphne had moved into my bedroom, it was covered with her makeup utensils, her brushes, her perfume. Me flacken in a small chest where she kept her jewelry. The sight of her things made me smile. They were so Daphne, and gave the room a homely feeling it had lacked before. The door directly to my right led into the walk-in wardrobe. To the left, a few yards ahead, another door led into the living room. Daphne and I usually kept that door wide open. Thankfully, neither the crew members that had cleaned the suite in the morning, nor our uninvited guests had closed it. From my vantage point I couldn't see the lounge sofa, which was to my left, along the wall that the living room shared with the bathroom. But I had a clear view of the dining area and the desk. I let out a sigh of relief when I saw Daphne sitting in the chair in front of the desk. She had drawn it to the side so that she see old face our uninvited guests on the sofa. She sat very upright, and her face was a stony mask. I told you, Harry stayed behind to have a beer with one of his friends at the sports bar. I have no idea when he'll return, she said. If she had seen the disturbance in the air caused by my entrance in the bedroom from the corner of her eyes, she didn't let on. You're lying, you bitch. What have you done with my fiancé? That was Ginny's voice. I've done nothing to him, Daphne answered. And he's not your fiancé. Of course he is, that cheating bastard. You've shagged him. I saw your things in the bedroom. He's engaged to me. You whore. She almost screeched. Though Daphne's face remained calm, I could tell that she was quickly losing her patience with Ginny. I couldn't blame her. I had eared more than enough from my ex already. It seemed to me her hold on reality had lessened even more. Ginny and I had never talked about marriage, although she had tried to bring it up frequently in our few conversations. I had evaded the topic to the best of my abilities. Ginny, please, that won't help us. Hermione tried to interfere. Shut up, Granger. It's all your fault. I begged you to me back and go after him right after he disappeared, but no, Madam had better things to do. You wanted to search for your parents. Look where that's got me. He's shagging that Death Eater whore over there. I had to suppress a grin in spite of my fury. Trust Hermione to try the way of logical reasoning first. As short as my time with Ginny had been, it had taught me that it was of no use to try to reason with her if she was in one of her tempers. My wand firmly in my right hand, I crept into the living room and pressed myself flat against the wall behind the dining table. Motionlessly, I tried to melt into the background, hoping that my so-called friends wouldn't notice the disturbance in the air caused by my disillusionment charm. I was lucky, they were too distracted by Daphne to pay any heed to a possible attack from behind their backs. Ron was sprawled over the chaise longue part of the lounge sofa that had served as Daphne's bed until Hiroshima. His ears were an alarming shade of red, a sure sign that he was about to explode any second. He had his wand trained on Daphne, but his lazy posture clearly betrayed that he underestimated her. I mentally shook my head. From their last encounter in Diagon Alley he should know that she was a force to reckon with, however poor her performance in defense against the dark arts might have been. Probably it was a blessing in disguise for him that the Aurors wouldn't accept him without his NEWTs. It was questionable if he would last long as an Auror with that attitude. Beside him, Hermione looked alarmed, her gaze flitting from Ron to her left to Ginny to her right. And she wrung her hands. Ginny's face was contorted in a grotesque mask of hate. Her eyes were mere slits in her red face and she bared her teeth at Daphne. She sat on the edge of the sofa, leaning forward as if ready to pounce like a predator on the hunt, her wand trained on Daphne. My girlfriend lived up to her pureblood upbringing. Her unmoved posture showed no sign of fear, and the look she gave my three friends reminded me of my Aunt Petunia when she found a speck of dirt on her immaculate floors. Unfortunately, that enraged Ginny beyond reason. Her Lee's expression suddenly morphed into something I had only seen in horror films until now. You stole my fiancé. I'm going to kill you for that. She shouted. Her fury was so intense that the wand in her hand trembled. Avada Kedavra. It happened as if in slow motion, but yet so fast that I had no chance to interfere. Unable to do anything, I had to watch the killing curse hiss through the air towards the love of my life. Daphne's body thudded to the floor. I closed my eyes, wanting to die right beside her. But my damned heart refused to stop beating. You hexed my sister. Ron roared. My heart missed a beat. Then started thumping like a drum. I opened my eyes wide, just in time to see Ron jump up from the sofa. He was caught in his midriff by the disarming charm Daphne silently sent at him. From her crouching position on the floor, the back of his head hit the wall. He was flung against with a nasty thunk, before he slumped onto the sofa. His eyes stared vacantly into space. I looked for Ginny. She lay in front of the sofa. Her body rigid and her arms pressed along her body. Only her eyes moved rapidly, exuding a nauseating hate. Oh Ginny, what have you done? Hermione cried, her face as pale as a sheet. She looked as if she was going to faint any second. I didn't care. My eyes were on Daphne, who had just scrambled to her feet. Canceling my disillusionment charm, I rushed to my girlfriend and almost crushed her in my arms. Trembling all over, I buried my face in her hair, not ashamed of my tears. Daphne flung her arms around me and hugged me as if she would never let me go. She was shaking in my arms, too. And her tears spilled on my shirt. I don't know how long we stood like that, drawing comfort from each other. Merlin, Daphne, I thought she got you. I whispered into her hair. Daphne raised her head from my shoulder and looked at me. No chance. She trembled so hard that her aim was way off. The moment I saw the direction her curse would take, I let myself drop to the floor and cast a body bind curse on her. She wrapped her arms around my neck and pulled me towards her in a kiss that did a lot to reassure me. I love you, Harry, she said when she pulled away from me. Her eyes beaming like two sapphire stars with that special look that was only meant for me. I love you, too, Daphne. Merlin, when I saw that curse hurtling to you, my voice broke and I couldn't go on. Once again, I pulled her towards me in a bone-breaking hug until she complained. You hurt me, love. Sorry, Daphne. I loosened my grip immediately, though I still kept one arm around her waist. Afraid she would vanish if I let go of her. She gave me a smile full of understanding and caressed my cheek with her hand. Of course, my obnoxious so-called best friend had to butt in. On groaned dramatically as he came to his, admittedly little, senses and sat up. He touched the back of his head with his hand. Ouch. About time you show up, Potter. Your slut injured me. I stiffened and clenched my fists. Weasley, if you insult my girlfriend one more time, you're going to regret it. She injured me. She disarmed you because you were going to hex her. I replied, inwardly, counting to 10 to keep my temper in check. She deserved it, she hexed my sister. Ron replied, indignantly, who just cast one of the unforgivables on her. I retorted. Ron shrugged his shoulders. Who cares? She's just a snake. Something inside me snapped. The blood rushed in my ears, and I didn't hear the roar that escaped my mouth as I lunged at the bloody git and grabbed him by the collar of his shirt. My right fist connected with his jaw with a sickening, yet satisfying noise. I had caught him by surprise, and he didn't have a chance to defend himself when my second blow knocked him down. Harry! Hermione screamed into my ear. She grabbed my left arm with both hands and tried to drag me away from her lover. I didn't budge and waited with raised fists of a sign of resistance from Ron, but he was knocked out cold. Knowing that his Weasley temper would have him shouting for revenge as soon as he had finished considering the back of his eyelids, I let my wand slid out of the holster and cast Incarcerus. I was still angry beyond anything, and instead of the thick ropes I had expected, heavy chains wrapped themselves around Ron's ankles and his upper body, pressing his arms to his sides. Harry, is that really necessary? Hermione demanded. I whirled around, still breathing hard. You heard what he said, Hermione. Do you think I'd let him callously shrug off the fact that his sister just tried to murder my girlfriend because of her petty jealousy? Get real, Hermione. She harumphed, but I ignored her and went over to Ginny. Never before had I raised my hand against a woman who wasn't a Death Eater or hadn't tried to hex me first. I was determined to make an exception for Ginny today. When I loomed over her, the expression full of hate vanished from her face, and her eyes smiled at me with the sweetness I remembered from these enchanted 3 weeks after the Quidditch match in my 6th year. The abrupt change was disturbing. I yanked her to her feet. The sudden movement made her long hair swing over her shoulder and into my face. My nose caught the fragrance of the flowery perfume she loved to wear, the scent that I would always link to Ginny and that spring 2 years ago. My desire to beat the living daylight out of her abated. A wonderful feeling came over me, as if I was floating on cloud 9. I raised my wand and cancelled Daphne's body-bind curse. Ginny's voice was the sweetest thing I had heard in a long time. "Harry, I've missed you so much, sweetheart. How could I ever leave her? How could I think I loved another woman?" I made a step towards her to take her in my arms. An expression of uneasiness appeared on her face, and she retreated from me as far as she could. "Ginny," I whined, "I've missed you so much." "I've missed you too, Harry," she assured me, but her eyes avoided mine, and she tried to retreat even further. She then turned her head to the side and gave Daphne a look of triumph. I also looked at my current girlfriend. I had to end it right now. Anything else wouldn't be fair, neither to Ginny, nor to Daphne. "Daphne, I'm sorry," I began. Her smile was grim. "I understand completely, Harry," she replied and raised her wand at me. Ginny screamed and flung herself at Daphne. The next instant the sounds in the room seemed to be muffled and distorted. I raised my hand to touch my ear and found I had a bubblehead charm around my head. The flowery scent of Ginny's perfume was gone, and I was breathing in clean air. That same second, the floating feeling vanished. "Do something, Harry," Hermione shouted and yanked my arm. I shook my head to clear my mind and looked around. Daphne and Ginny were rolling on the floor. Ginny was trying to get her hands around Daphne's throat, while Daphne obviously fought for her life, using nails and teeth and any advantage she could get. Daphne was taller and physically in better shape than Ginny, who hated bodily workout, but Ginny fought with the strength of madness, and her fingers eventually closed around Daphne's throat. I didn't hesitate. I pulled my wand and threw a stunner at Ginny. A thick, red beam of light hurtled towards her and caught her in the back. Her back arched at an impossible angle, and she collapsed over Daphne. I rushed towards the two girls on the floor and pulled Ginny off my girlfriend, admittedly not very gently. Then I knelt down beside Daphne and helped her sit up. "Are you all right, love?" I asked, my arm supporting her. "Just peachy," she croaked with a grimace and grabbed with her hand at her throat. That was scary. She leaned her head against my shoulder and closed her eyes, trying to regain her composure. After a few moments she opened her eyes again and looked at me. "I think I'm ready to get up." I helped her to her feet and led her to the dining table. Hermione looked up from where she knelt beside Ginny, her wand in her hand. "Harry, what did you do to her? The counter spell won't work on her." Her voice sounded panicked. Ginny was the last of my concerns at the moment, but I also knew that Hermione wouldn't stop nagging me, so I asked back, "Have you checked her vital signs?" "Yes, they're all right," Hermione answered, pointing her wand at Ginny again and casting a spell soundlessly. "Then I wouldn't worry at the moment," I replied while I helped Daphne to sit down. She gave me a thankful smile in return. Hermione was not happy with me. She harumphed and glared at me. I walked over to the bar and fetched a glass and a bottle of water for Daphne. "To be honest, Hermione, the longer she's out of action, the better for all of us. She'll come around eventually." I opened the bottle and poured some water into the glass that I then handed to Daphne. Hermione looked at me as if I had grown a second head. "Who are you? I don't recognize you anymore, Harry. There was a time when we were so close to you." She made a motion with her hand that included Ron, Ginny and herself. "That seems to have changed since she came into your life. What did she do to you that you don't know you're real friends anymore? And cancel that ludicrous bubblehead charm. You look like a fool. Better looking like a fool duh. And being under the influence of the love potion the Weaslette has in her hair," Daphne interjected and took a sip of her water. Hermione whirled around to face her. "Shut up, you bitch. You have no idea what you're talking about." Daphne laughed at that. "Haven't I? You were there, Granger. You saw what happened when Harry got the Weaslet's hair in his face. Obviously that was the trigger Harry needed to get out of the love potion-induced bewitchment you put him under." Hermione retorted. She got up to her feet and trained her wand on Daphne. Let him go. Right now. That was enough. Expelliarmus. Hermione's wand sailed towards me in a graceful arch. I stashed it in the back pocket of my trousers, and then summoned Ron and Ginny's wands and also put them away. Harry. How could you? Hermione gasped. For once in your life, shut up, Hermione. I said, tiredly. I had done what was necessary as soon as I realized that Ginny was trying to kill Daphne a second time tonight, and then made sure that Daphne was all right. The implications of what had happened in our suite tonight were just beginning to catch up with me. My hands trembled and my head spun. I wasn't in the mood to deal with one of Hermione's long-winded rants. That silenced her, though she gave me a look that reminded me of a hurt animal. Sit down on the sofa. I told her. She obeyed without an objection. That to be a first in all the time I'd known her. I directed my wand at Ginny and silently cast the binding charm. Again, instead of thick ropes, chains wrapped themselves around her body, a sure sign and I was still as angry as never before in my life. I levitated her onto the sofa, beside Hermione. Then I took a chair from the dining table and sat down next to Daphne. She reached out and took my hand. Immediately, I felt calmer. I cleared my throat. Why did you break into our suite, Hermione? Hermione actually had the decency to look ashamed. It was Ginny's idea. She said we needed to do something to save you from her clutches. She jerked her chin at Daphne. Her callousness irked me, but I decided to let it go for the time being. I needed answers, and I wouldn't get them if I started squabble with Hermione about her behavior towards my girlfriend. Ron and Mrs. Weasley agreed. Mrs. Weasley said she probably kept you under the Imperious Curse or a love potion or both. She said we had to get you back to the burrow so that she could work on an antidote for whichever love potion she gave you. I shook my head at that. Hermione, you know that the Imperious Curse doesn't work on me. I shook off an Imperious Curse cast by Voldemort himself. She bit her lower lip. I know. That's why I thought it more likely you were under a love potion. After all, Greengrass parents were in league with Voldemort. So I thought that this was a conspiracy to get you and take vengeance on you. Hermione, I've been traveling with Daphne for 3 months now, yet I haven't been abducted. Didn't that make you think? I asked, my exasperation at her growing. For the brightest witch of her age, Hermione could be exceptionally blind sometimes. How am I supposed to know how the brain of a Death Eater works? She defended herself. But it sounded lame. From the article in the Prophet we knew the name of the ship you took for your travels. I found out the itinerary of your cruise and knew you were going to be in Colombo today. Ron bought 2 international portkeys to Colombo and back. Our plan was to get into your cabin, stun you and take you back with us to the burrow. It never occurred to us you wouldn't be there when we arrived. Daphne and I shared a grim smile. It appeared that my friends had made the same mistake as I had done when I had gone after Daphne. They didn't take the time difference into account. Also, it had probably been our luck that we had to leave for our excursion that early in the morning. It was quite the surprise when we arrived here and saw this. She ate a motion with her hand that included all of our suite. I mean, I know that the Princess Isabella is a luxury cruise ship. I've traveled with my parents before and I had an idea of what to expect. Ron and Ginny, however, had no idea. Ron got furious. That was no surprise. Ron had always been jealous of my money. Ginny at first seemed to be pleasantly surprised. She walked around to have a closer look. But when she came into the bedroom, she got mad. Hermione turned red. She didn't have to tell me. Ginny saw that Daphne and I share a bedroom and got into one of her infamous tempers, I concluded. Hermione nodded, still rather red in the face. It was scary. I'm used to her temper, but I've never seen her like that before. She kept saying over and over again that you've shagged bitch and that you're both going to pay for that. Then she broke out in tears. She couldn't understand why you slept with her and walked away, and are now living together with a Death Eater whore. Ron and I had a hard time to calm her down. You can imagine how furious Ron got when he saw how distressed Ginny was. Again, Daphne and I shared a look. Her face was calm, but I could see in her eyes that she was quickly losing her patience with my 3 so-called friends. Did it never occur to you to ask for Harry's side of the story, Granger? Hermione gave her a defiant look. That wouldn't have been of much use. As he was under your influence. She spat. For Merlin's sake, stop it, Hermione. I exploded. She jumped and shifted her gaze to me. I stood up and paced the room, unable to sit still and listen to her misguided ideas any longer. I needed to make her see reason, but how? George hadn't exaggerated. Hermione seemed to be firmly under the Weasley influence at the moment, at the cost of her brilliant ability of logical thinking. On the other hand, I was too agitated to deal with her tonight. Ginny had tried to kill Daphne, not once, but twice. I knew I was still in shock. Any attempt to talk reason into Hermione would most likely lead to a shouting match on my part if she kept being so obnoxious. Where is your return portkey? I asked. Hermione's brows rose at my change of topic, but she answered. It's in my pocket. Why? Get it out. I want you three to leave. Now, I told her. But, Harry, she objected. I shook my head. Now, Hermione, I see no use in talking to you any longer. Since you're obviously not willing to listen to anything I say, maybe you'll use that head of yours to think about what happened here today, but I won't hold my breath for it. If you come to the conclusion that you're willing to listen to me, a letter from you will reach me anytime. Until then, we'll go separate ways. Her lips quivered. So you're going to end our friendship, Harry? I'm not ending our friendship. But I'm definitely putting it on hold. It's your decision to make the next step. Of course, I won't wait indefinitely for that, I replied. A tear rolled down her cheek. I see. What about Ginny and Ron? Single quote. Sorry, but that ship has sailed. Today, Ginny twice tried to kill my girlfriend. Ron callously condoned his sister's actions. That's not something I can forgive easily, Hermione. She looked as if she was going to object, but thought the better of it when I glared at her. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled a crushed can out of it and placed it on the coffee table. I need your help, Harry. You'll have to free at least one of their arms so that they can hold on to the can. I complied and freed Ginny and Ron's left arm from the heavy chains. With a gluing charm I then fixed their index fingers to the can. I don't want them to wake up here, but I also don't want them to get lost in the void, I explained to Hermione. However, I had to admit that the latter option was tempting. Hermione only nodded to that. My wand? She asked and raised her chin challengingly. With an inward sigh, I handed her the wand. It was obvious that she was still being unreasonable. I'll send Ginny and Ron's wands by owl, I told her. She didn't look happy, but there wasn't much she could do about it. She pointed her wand at the portkey and looked at me a last time. Goodbye, Harry. I hope you'll never regret your decision. Don't worry about that. I won't, I replied. Her eyes widened when she heard the firm conviction in my voice. She put her finger on the can and activated the portkey. It turned blue, and in the next moment my three former friends were gone. I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding and turned to Daphne. She was still seated at the table. Angry red bruises had formed around her throat, where Ginny's fingers had tried to press the life out of her. I shuddered at the thought of what could have happened, had I awoke. And out of my love potion-induced befuddlement a minute later. The mere thought caused me to break out in cold sweat. An arm slid around my waist. I hadn't noticed Daphne walking to me. She raised her wand and cancelled the bubblehead charm. Then cupped her hand around my cheek. The look she gave me made my heart beat a drumroll. You sent them away. They've been your friends since your first year. You've fought against Voldemort together. But you chose me over your best friends. Her voice was full of amazement. I caught her hand and pressed a kiss in her palm. They aren't my true friends. If they were true friends, they'd try to understand my point of view instead of insisting on their preconceived notions. They'd be happy for me that I've found the one for me, instead of trying to break us apart. I took her in my arms. I love you, Daphne, and I want to spend my life with you. I can't imagine a world without you. Watching how Ginny tried to kill you twice tonight was the most horrible thing that ever happened to me. The gaze she gave me in return took my breath away. There it was again, the certainty that she would stand by my side, love me and support me, no matter what life would throw at us. I have no idea how I knew it, but my inner voice told me this was the moment I had been waiting for since Hong Kong. My hands trembled when I reached into the pocket of my trousers. A ND pulled out the small box I had been carrying with me each moment since I had left the jeweler's shop in Hong Kong. I flipped it open with the nail of my thumb and held it out to her. Will you marry me, Daphne? Because we both want it and not because of some silly pureblood traditions or the expectations of the public. Yes, she exclaimed and flung her arms around my neck. The box slipped out of my hand. I vaguely registered the ring hitting the floor with a soft tinkle. The outside world ceased to exist. All that mattered was the young woman in my arms. She said yes. Until today, the me. Mori of that moment helps me to produce a Patronus of a magnitude hitherto unknown to the magical world. Daphne laughed and cried when we finally broke off the kiss, and her eyes beamed with happiness. I sank down onto the chair she had just vacated and pulled her onto my lap. I have no idea how long it took until we finally remembered the ring. Of course, it had fallen out of the box and had lost itself somewhere in the lush carpet. We both searched for it on all fours for at least 5 minutes until Daphne found it under the dining table. I slipped it on her finger. Daphne held out her hand in front of her and took a good look at the ring for the first time. Then, she smiled at me. It's perfect, love. Of course, there was only one answer to that. We never got down to ordering dinner and watching a DVD that night, as we had planned on the ride from Kandy back to Colombo. DG. We woke up the next morning when the sun was already high in the sky. Beside me, Daphne yawned, then stretched with a content sigh. Good morning, sleepyhead. My fiancé purred at me. You're one to talk, I snorted and pecked her on her pert nose. My eyes came to rest on her throat. It looked horrible. The color of her bruises was starting to change from red into a bluish purple. A number of other bruises, that had been invisible the previous night, had appeared on her skin. I carefully traced the outline of the bruised area with my fingertips. Her skin felt swollen. She grimaced with pain, and I hurriedly pulled my finger away. Does it hurt that bad? I asked. Daphne shrugged in response. I'll live, she replied. Then she gave me an impish grin. I'm famished. We burned off a lot of calories last night. She cast the duvet aside and got up. Be a dear and order breakfast, Harry, while I take a shower. She called over her shoulder as she sauntered into the bathroom with a provocative swing of her hips. I appreciatively watched her retreating form in her birthday suit. Breakfast was overrated, after all, I decided. And followed her. DG. We eventually managed to have breakfast. About an hour later we sat outside on the veranda and enjoyed a very late morning meal. Daphne's brewy S's now were invisible under the glamour charms she had placed around her throat and her neck, but she had decided to dress in a loose tunic with a band collar, just in case, to hide the bruises from curious eyes. Her engagement ring glinted in the sunlight every time she moved her hand, but her eyes were even brighter every time she looked at me. I couldn't take my eyes off her. As always, it was Daphne who brought me back to earth. Gently, but decidedly, after the room service had cleared the table. She climbed onto the sun island and motioned me to join her. Of course she didn't have to tell me twice. But from the way she looked at me, I knew that she had something on her mind. We've got to talk about yesterday, love, she said quietly. My happy mood vanished as if the sun had been darkened by a cloud. There isn't much to talk about. Ginny cast an unforgivable on you. You know as well as I do what the punishment for that is. I shuddered. Even though Kingsley had abolished the Dementors immediately after the war, Azkaban still was a desolate place. My shoulders slumped. Daphne's eyes were full of sympathy when she took my hand. It doesn't have to come to that, Harry. As long as I don't press charges. Nobody will know what happened and she won't be tried by the Wizengamot. Why wouldn't you want to press charges, Daphne? We're talking about the killing curse cast at you. I replied. You can't let her get away with that simply like that. I snapped my fingers. We're also talking about a young woman who went through an unimaginable trauma at the age of 11 and received no help afterwards. Daphne contradicted. And Merlin knows what happened to her at Hogwarts last year. I've heard rumors, she broke off and bit her lower lip. That got my attention. What rumors? Well, I've told you about the way the Carrows kept harassing me, always coming into my dorm when I changed, she began. I nodded, remembering the day on our way from San Francisco to Sydney and she had told me about the conditions at Hogwarts during the war for the first time. She had dropped little snippets now and then during the following weeks. Not enough to get the whole picture, but enough for me to know that the reign of the Carrows must have been hell on earth for everyone who was not a Death Eater, which also included the few Slytherins who had tried to stay away from Voldemort. As rumor has it, they were even more horrible to everyone who dared to openly oppose their reign openly, she continued. Ginny was at the top of their list, together with Longbottom and Finnegan. Even though she claimed that you'd broken up with her at the end of our 6th year, no one believed her. I lost count of the numerous times the Carrows gave her detention. It was always only the Carrows and her in these detentions. However, after my experiences with the Carrows, I fear the worst. Her words hit me like a bludger to the stomach. You mean, they raped her? I finally asked, dreading her answer. Daphne shook her head. I doubt they went that far. After all, Ginny's a pureblood, and raping a pureblood girl meant crossing a line that would bring the wrath of all pureblood families on their heads. No, it wasn't rape, but there are many more ways to humiliate a woman than to rape her, love. I felt sick. It's my fault, I whispered. I never should have started dating her. That earned me a sharp slap on the shoulder. Stop it at once, Harry. You're not responsible for the 6 sexual aberrations of the Carrows. Daphne chided. Ginny would have been a target, anyway. She's a Weasley, and therefore she was considered a blood traitor. That was already enough to guarantee her the special attentions of the Carrows. In my mind I knew she was right. 11 years of undisturbed conditioning by my loving relatives, however, had taught me that everything that happened somehow had to be my fault. I had worked with Mr. Freed to overcome that pattern of thought, but it was quite hard. I gave Daphne a weak smile. Thanks for the reminder. I needed that. You're welcome, she smiled and squeezed my hand. Then, however, her face became grim. We also should keep in mind the possibility that Ginny's been manipulated. She did make an effort to move on during your 4th and 5th year. I wonder why she suddenly decided otherwise. The implication of her train of thought didn't escape me. You mean that her own mother might have manipulated her? It's the only logical conclusion, isn't it? If Granger didn't brew the love potion she had in her hair, it must have been someone else close to Ginny. Mrs. Weasley has shown a penchant for love potions more than once. You overheard her talking about a love potion she once gave to her husband. George told us that she was looking up love potions in the family grimoire and even warned you that she was up to something. Point taken, I conceded. I just can't see why. Daphne shook her head at me. Honestly, Harry, sometimes you go overboard with your modesty. Firstly, you're bloody rich. Secondly, you're extremely magically powerful. Thirdly, you're the chosen one and vanquisher of the Dark Lord. Fourthly, you're the head of 4 ancient houses, though Mrs. Weasley probably knows of only 2 of them. Fifthly, you're supposed to be the next Albus Dumbledore, and are going to wield a lot of power in our world one day. Stop it, Daphne, I protested. Is that the way you see me? No, that's the way a potential pureblood mother-in-law sees you, she replied with a smile. To me, you're the most tender and caring boy fr. IEND, and now fiancé a girl can wish for. It doesn't hurt, either, that you're handsome and an ardent lover. I blushed hard. You're exaggerating, love. She rolled her eyes at me, but didn't continue her embarrassing enumeration. Instead, she took her lower lip between her teeth, a thoughtful look in her eyes. I might also be a reason why she's trying to get you and her daughter together by all means, she finally said. What do you mean? I asked. My grandfather was in negotiations with the head of House Pruitt about a marriage contract between my father and Molly Pruitt. He broke them off when my father met my mother. She explained. Now I remembered and nodded. You mentioned that the day we met. You think it's possible that Mrs. Weasley bears a grudge because your father Mari ed your mother instead of her in projects that on her daughter. Because I broke up with Ginny and am now with you. Something like that, Daphne nodded. I frowned, considering her words. Sounds far-fetched to me, but Merlin knows what the war did to her. Fred's death has changed her, that was already evident in the few weeks I spent at the Burrow after the battle and before I broke off with Ginny. Judging by what George told us, she's still messed up. Daphne linked her fingers with mine. You saw how Ginny acted yesterday. Her letters already indicated that she'd lost the grip on reality, and yesterday's events proved that. I don't want to press charges against a girl who's most likely not responsible for her deeds. That's very honorable of you, Daphne, but there's such a thing as diminished responsibility, I replied. She shook her head. Not in the magical world, love. I gasped. What? That's barbaric. More likely medieval, I'd say, Daphne replied. There have been attempts to change the law and to introduce the concept of diminished responsibility in the past, but they've always failed. The main argument against it was that it's a Muggle concept and that the wizarding law, which dates from the times before the Wizengamot was founded, by the way, is more than adequate to deal with anything that happens. That reasoning didn't surprise me at all. It was just another reminder that the wizarding world thought itself superior to the Muggles. All right, have it your way, I finally agreed. But we'll have to document the evidence. I'm not at all convinced we've seen the last of this. We have to cover our backs, just in case. Spoken like a true Slytherin, my fiancé replied appreciatively. What do you have in mind? We need to take pictures of your throat. We should store copies of our memories of yesterday's events in unbreakable files, so that they can be viewed in a pensieve, if need be. Daphne nodded to that. What else? Too bad I didn't think of cutting off some of Ginny's hair before I sent her away yesterday. I was angry at myself for my oversight. That elicited a grin from her. Then you'll be happy to know that I put a strand of her hair in a paper bag that's now on your desk. You can send it to the Department of Mysteries for a private analysis. It's costly, but you need answers, and if you want to keep things under wraps, you can't send it to the Aurors. I rose my eyebrows. How did you come by a strand of Ginny's hair? I'm a Slytherin, love, and Slytherins fight dirty. I probably yanked it out when we fought yesterday. And found it on the carpet this morning, Daphne replied with an angelic face. Have I told you lately that I love you? I asked and put my arm around her shoulder. Not for the last 30 minutes, my fiancé replied and kissed me. DG. We documented the evidence and then went on with our usual routine. To my relief, and secret amazement, there was no letter from Ginny in the mail that day. Daphne read my face correctly. She didn't have time for that yesterday, Harry. She spent the day waiting for you. She had a point there. Luckily, there wasn't a letter from cousin Melissa, either. I began to feel tentatively optimistic that she had given up her crusade. My hopes rose even more when there wasn't a sign from her in the mail over the following 2 days. Daphne didn't share my optimism. She's hatching a plan, I bet. She's a Slytherin, after all. Besides that, after I refused to return to England, she told me she'd have to take action. I cast an approving glance at my fiancé on the deck chair beside me. She was working on her seamless tan in the absolute privacy of the part of the veranda at the side of the ship. What do you think she'll do? I asked. If I were in her place, I'd approach one of the minor pureblood families with a younger son and suggest a marriage contract. After all, even though I'm damaged goods, I'm still a member of the Sacred 28, and hey, Resson the head of an ancient house with a seat on the Wizengamot. That should be incentive enough to overlook the scandal I've caused. She gave me a saucy grin. Stop talking about yourself like that, love. Or I'll have to cast another, Aguamenti Gelido, at you, I warned her with a frown on my face. As you wish, my intended, Daphne replied with a chuckle and a mock servitude that didn't deceive me for a second. I demonstratively let my wand slip out of the invisible holder, while I smiled at her innocently. You're no fun, she complained and sat up, her arms slung around her knees. What worries me more is that we haven't heard anything from Ginny yet. After everything that happened, I can't believe that she would suddenly stop stalking you. My humorous mood suddenly deserted me. Don't jinx it, love. DG. The Princess Isabella reached Victoria, the capital city of the Seychelles. Daphne and I had hired a private car with a driver through the travel agency on board. We wanted to visit the world-famous beaches. Why did I even care to ask? Alvira had chuckled when we spoke to her about our plans for the day on the Seychelles. Victoria was a small town, and we soon left it behind us. We had to cross the mountains that surrounded Victoria to get to the beaches. Soon, our driver entered a rather narrow street that raised itself into the mountains in adventurous hairpin. In turns that made Daphne gasp and grasp for my arm more than once. The view of Victoria and the adjoining islands, however, was amazing. Our driver stopped at a tea plantation below the summit. We'd Been told by the travel agency to wear sturdy shoes, and when our driver now led us to a short, but extremely steep hiking trail that ended at a lookout point, we understood why. The hike wasn't long, but sweaty. It led us through a thick tropical forest. Our driver knew a lot about the fauna and flora of his country, and he pointed out the most interesting species to us. The view from the lookout point was awe-inspiring. Below us was the nice little town of Victoria, but we could see as far as to the islands of Praslin and Ladigue, and got the impressions of many more islands scattered in the vast Indian Ocean. Our driver promptly improved our general knowledge by telling us that the Republic of Seychelles consisted of 115 islands. We returned to the car and continued on our way to the beaches. Crossing the summit, the street led down on the other side of the mountains through the tropical forest in another set of adventurous turns. Every now and then we would have a glimpse of the Hor deep below us and the ocean behind it. Finally, we reached the base of the mountains, and turned into another street that led along the coast. At every turn, another white beach, dotted with picturesque granite boulders, would turn up. Each beach was more beautiful than the one before, but our driver assured us he would take us to the most beautiful of all of them. Finally, he turned into a rather bumpy road. The thick tropical forest closed around us. The beach seemed miles away, but suddenly the forest opened to a wide stretch of blinding white sand. Ahead of us, the ocean shimmered in a breathtaking array of more greens and blues than I would have thought possible to exist on this planet. Huge red granite boulders dotted the beach, offering pleasant shade. Daphne and I spread our towels in the sand in the shade of one of the boulders, and then chased each other into the water. The water was crystal clear and pleasantly warm. We swam and dived until we got tired, and then relaxed on the beach. After another swim we decided that it was time for lunch and we packed our things. Hand in hand we walked along the waterline to the restaurant at the other end of the beach. It was a landmark of the island and famous for its fish menu, our driver had told us. We enjoyed a delicate lunch on the shady terrace, with a breathtaking view of the ocean, and surrounded by the huge tortoises that were kept in an enclosure at the side of the restaurant. The Princess Isabella left Victoria at sunset. Daphne and I leaned against the railing of the veranda, watching the fiery spectacle. Daphne gave the island a last wistful look. I'd love to return for a longer stay one day. I put my arm around her and kissed her temple. I think that can be arranged, love. HP, DG. My secret hope that Melissa and Ginny would leave us alone were crushed the next morning, when I extracted a big, bulky envelope from Melissa, and even 2 letters from Ginny, from the banishing box. I told you so. Daphne sighed as I handed her the letter from her cousin. She tore the envelope open. A thick stack of papers fell into her hands. I knew she was going to set up a marriage contract for me. She exclaimed. She slammed the contract on the dining table in a huff and perused the first page. Her face turned crimson. What's the matter, love? I asked, alarmed. Daphne reserved her temper for events that really got to her. I'd been on the receiving end of her outbursts twice. Admittedly I had deserved it each time, and I knew the warning signs quite well by now. She shoved the contract to me without a word. When I read the name of the male party, I didn't know whether to be angry on her behalf or amused. Summoning all my Slytherin traits, I managed to keep a bland face. Gregory Goyle. Really, love, I didn't know you were that desperate. For my cheek, I received the expected slap on my arm. However, it wasn't hard and was accompanied by a soft chuckle, both telling me she also had discovered the funny side of Melissa's attempt. She pulled the contract towards her and gave it a quick scan. What a pleasant agreement. You'll be happy to know that he demands nothing of me except most of my money. Apparently, he needs it to support himself while he's on the run. She pulled her wand out and directed it at the offending contract. There's only one answer to that. The next second, the contract burst into flames. I clapped my hands while Daphne vanished the ashes with a lazy flick of her wand. I know the goblins filter out howlers sent to your banishing box. But what happens if I want to send a howler through the box? I think cousin Melissa needs one, she asked me. That shouldn't be a problem, but don't you think it will be better to tell her of our engagement? After all, that's what she and Matthew wanted all along, I asked. You have a point, but I want to see how far she will go with this, Daphne replied. She sat down at the table and pulled a sheet of her perso. Nalist parchment towards her with a feral grin. I almost pitied Melissa, almost, being the key word. While Daphne was busy composing a howler for her meddling cousin, I opened Ginny's letters and gave them a quick scan. Though the letters were as embarrassing as ever, there was a change I couldn't point my fingers at when I read them for the first time. I had to read them once again until I realized that their undertone had become downright creepy. However, I wasn't sure if I was right, so I waited until Daphne had finished her howler to Melissa, and then asked her to read the letters and tell me if I was wrong. Her face got considerably paler while she read them. "You're right," she said as she handed the letters back to me. Her eyes were concerned as she looked at me. "Promise me that you'll be careful, love. Always," I replied and kissed her. HP, DG. Daphne's howler must have impressed Melissa. There wasn't a response from her when I opened the banishing box the next morning. However, I received another creepy letter from Ginny, and it had the unfortunate effect of spoiling our day. No matter what we did to distract ourselves from the uneasy feeling it had instilled in us, nothing helped. Not even a long and hard workout in the gym managed to calm us down. "You've got to do something about her, Harry. Collecting the evidence and waiting for her next move isn't enough," Daphne told me when we returned to the suite after our workout. "You're right," I agreed while I slumped down on the sofa and rubbed my face with the palms of my hands. By now, Daphne had taught me enough about pureblood customs that I knew what my next move had to be. Even though the Weasleys were blood traders, and proud of that, at least Mr. Weasley and his wife had the pureblood code of co-Nduct ingrained into them and would take a formal complaint to the head of house about Ginny's conduct seriously. But that didn't mean I had to like the prospect of having to write such a letter. However, I got to my feet and walked to the desk to get it over with. Daphne patted my shoulder encouragingly and disappeared into the bathroom to get ready for the evening. I was still seated at the desk, trying to compose the letter to Mr. Weasley, when she returned. With raised eyebrows she looked at the many balls of scrunched-up paper in the waste paper basket and beside it. Then she peeked over M.'s shoulder and read what I had written so far. I turned my head and looked up at her. "That letter won't do, will it?" Daphne scrunched her nose. "To tell you the truth, no. Why don't you stop trying to tell him what happened? Just ask for a meeting with him and his heir as soon as we're back in England. It should be before the ball in honor of the veterans of the battle. You don't want her to kick up a stink there, do you?" "Merlin. No," I exclaimed as I blanched. I scrunched up the sheet of paper in front of me and drew a new one towards me. This time, I had no problems to write a short letter, asking for an appointment in the back room of the Leaky Cauldron on the 3rd of May. With a relieved sigh I put the biro down. Then I put the letter into an envelope and sent it off through the banishing box. At least, I was now doing something about the Ginny problem, I thought while I walked into the bathroom. HP, DG. We virtually fled from board when the Princess Isabella reached Mauritius the morning after. Once again we had opted for a beach day in favor of sightseeing. A bus drove us across the island to a small yacht harbor. There we entered a catamaran and sailed along the coast to the Isles aux Cerfs. On our way, we had a stop at a reef for some snorkeling. It was nice, but not as impressive as our snorkeling trip at the Great Barrier Reef had been. We reached our final destination around lunchtime and were dropped at the pier of a posh resort. After a sumptuous lunch, we settled down in deck chairs on the beach. Of course, Daphne and I couldn't resist the temptation of the crystal clear water for long. Late in the afternoon a ferry brought us back to the main island, and we entered another bus for the ride across the island, back to Port Louis, where the Princess Isabella waited for us, ready to lift anchors and set sail once more. HP, DG. Melissa's answer came 2 days later, after another day where we had managed to escape the wizarding world on a sightseeing tour on the Ile de la Réunion. Once again, I pulled a large, bulky envelope out of the banishing box. "Another marriage contract, by the looks of it," I remarked as I handed it to Daphne. Suffice to say, I also found 3 letters from Ginny when I perused the rest of the box's contents. Though I opened them and filed them away with the rest, I didn't read them. I was not inclined to be worn down by the sick barrage of words of a stalker ever again. Daphne opened the envelope she had received from Melissa and perused the contract. I jumped when she let out a hiss like Crookshanks, on the night he had gone after Scabbers. She sprang up and turned to the window, breathing hard. Had she had a tail, it would have whipped the air. I stood up and stepped behind her, wanting to put my hand on her shoulder. She raised her hand, forestalling me. "You'd better not touch me right now, Harry. I'm so angry that I'll probably lash out at you." Never before had I seen her this angry, and I wisely refrained from making any comment. Instead, I sat down on the sofa and waited until she had calmed herself. She took a couple of deep breaths. Then she turned around and sat down beside me. Her eyes were still dark with anger. She took another deep breath, as if to fortify herself. "The offer is from Lucius Malfoy, head of House Malfoy. He graciously allows his son to marry me and restore my good name. In exchange for Greengrass shipping and my seat on the Wizengamot. Oh, and I have to present the Malfoy line with a male heir. After that, I'm allowed to withdraw to a house Lucius will choose for me and an allowance he alone can decide on." I felt the bile rise in my throat. Before I knew what overcame me, I slipped my wand out and directed it at the contract. It burst out in flames with a most satisfying, whooshing sound. The heat was so intense that there were no ashes left. Daphne relaxed visibly and leaned against me. "Merlin, you still hate the ferret." "No, I don't hate him," I contradicted as I put my arm around her. My anger wasn't directed at him, but at Lucius. I know Malfoy is nothing but a poor bugger who had no chance of developing some backbone with a father like Lucius. He's a coward, but not a killer. Even though he fancies himself to be one. My words caused her to smile faintly. "You know him very well." It took me a long time until I came to that conclusion. After all, I was as big a git as he was at school. "That's not your fault. You were abused and manipulated by those who should have helped you." She protested. "Thanks for your loyalty, love, but I know I was an idiot back then." She still looked as if she didn't agree. "Maybe a small one," she finally conceded. "But there's no denying that even as a schoolboy you possessed a degree of decency and moral backbone no Slytherin could ever hope to achieve. You always did what was right, although it was almost killing you." "You were wrong, you know," I told her. "I'm not the infallible moral compass. Of magical society the Daily Prophet made me after the battle. That was nothing more than a poorly veiled attempt to get back in my good graces after their slanderous campaign before our 5th year. I did quite a lot of things I'm not proud of and that could have even landed me in Azkaban." The look she gave me was one of utter disbelief. "Not you, Harry." "And yet I did," I contradicted her. And I told her about my confrontation with Malfoy during our 6th year. "But he cast the torture curse on you." She objected. And I sidestepped it and retaliated in my blind anger and hate with a curse. The consequence of which I had no idea. The marginal note in the Book of the Half-Blood Prince should have been warning enough not to use that curse before I'd tested it. I could have killed him, Daphne. You could. But you never had the intention of killing him. You even didn't want to hurt him. You just thought it would be something funny, like the other hex you'd found. It's like a muggle driver losing control of the car because he was distracted for a second and a pedestrian gets seriously hurt. He'd be punished for it, but not in the same way as if he'd used his car as a weapon to intentionally kill the pedestrian. You got punished for it, didn't you? The memory of my punishment after my less than stellar deed still had the power to make me grimace. I got detention with Snape very night until the end of the school year. Now, that was a hard punishment, she smiled. I sighed. I can't do anything wrong in your eyes, can I? Not much, she said. Mark you, if you were going to forget my birthday or our anniversary. That made me chuckle, though I interrupted her. Don't try to sidetrack me, love. I'll give you another reason not to look at me through pink glasses. Though it's of course very flattering to my ego. Prat, she chuckled. Exactly. That's what I've been trying to make you understand for the last 10 minutes, I replied. I've used 2 of the unforgivable curses. Her eyes got wide at that. When and against whom? She asked finally. The first time was during the fight against the Death Eaters at the Ministry. Bellatrix Lestrange had just sent Sirius through the veil. I was out of my mind that moment. I went after her and cast the torture curse at her. She gave me a shrewd side glance. To what result? It didn't as much as even tickle her, I replied. She obviously got a thrill out of being tortured. Ew. Daphne made a face. Well, I agree, it was not one of your best moments, but you were mad with grief and obviously didn't do her any harm. She scrunched her nose. Quite the contrary, she added as an afterthought. I snorted at that. All right. What about what I did to Snape after I thought he killed Dumbledore? At least the school saw me chasing after him and trying to throw unforgivables and dark curses at him. Believe me, I wanted to hurt him at that moment, even kill him. I was there, she nodded. I also saw that you were out of your mind because of grief. It was obvious. After all, you just thought he killed your mentor. But he was way out of your league. Not once was he in danger from you. She raised her hand and brushed my cheek. I think you can plead extenuating circumstances in both cases, love. Well, during our break-in at Gringotts I cast the Imperious Curse on one of the goblins, I said, continuing with my confession. She knew everything about the break-in by now. It had been in the papers during the days after the Battle of Hogwarts, but I'd also given her an overview over our hunt for the Horcruxes. Cocking her head to the side, Daphne considered my words. Did you try to come up with a better plan before? Of course we did. I don't know how many times we discussed our plan with Griphook. It was he who pointed out that we'd need to put the goblin on guard under the Imperious Curse. Again, extenuating circumstances. You already got off of the consequences of the break-in because of that, didn't you? You wouldn't have got the Horcrux otherwise, even the goblins acknowledged that, she decided. That was true. Kingsley had told me about his negotiations with the goblins to prevent me from the repercussions of my stunt. It had been my luck that keeping dark items in the vaults was against the contract between the wizarding world and the goblins. They had stopped screaming for my blood after they had learned of the Horcrux and accepted the reparations Kingsley offered in the name of the wizarding world. Were there any more instances you've used the unforgivables, love? She asked. The last time was just before the battle. It was in the Ravenclaw common room. I cast the torture curse on Amicus Carrow after he spat at Professor McGonagall, I told her. Well, the deed certainly doesn't rectify the punishment. But I see no reason for Carrow to complain. The torture course was legal during that time. The Wizengamot countermanded the criminal nature of the Tortu. Recurse immediately after Voldemort came into full power. That's the reason why students had to practice it on each other at Hogwarts, my wonderful fiancé told me. I stared at her. I had completely forgotten about that. She smiled and put her arms around my waist in a short hug. See, there's no need to beat yourself up over what you've done. You fought a war. There isn't something like a morally clean war, Harry. You can't help doing things you're not proud of then, may it be out of necessity or because your feelings get the better of you. She hugged me again. Anyway, it doesn't change my opinion of you, love. I threw my arms in the air in mock frustration. I give up. Then I put my arms around her. You also have no reason to doubt your moral standards just because you're a Slytherin, love. You also fought against him. I told her, hugging her towards me. She shook her head. Not like you, Harry. I chose a side at the last possible moment, and not before I was forced to do so. Even then I went about it in a way that left me the option to join the winning side, in case you'd have failed and Voldemort would have prevailed. She shuddered. I'm not proud of that, she added quietly. Self-preservation is a very strong human trait, I replied. You did what was right in the end, Daphne, and that's all that matters. She still didn't look convinced. DG. I had no idea Daphne sent Melissa another howler that day, for there wasn't any mail from her the next morning. Unfortunately, that couldn't be said about Ginny. I was considering to ask Daphne to show me how to make a howler as I filed away another rather creepy letter from my ex. The next morning, however, brought another attempt of Melissa to establish a respectable marriage for Daphne. This time Daphne EAD the contract without any outward sign of anger. She then turned to the letter that accompanied the contract and frowned. What did Melissa write this time that irks you? I asked, looking up from my own mail. She issued an ultimatum. Daphne grimaced. I have to agree to one of the offers she sent me until I reach Southampton, or she'll choose for me. She can't do that. You're of age. I protested. Legally, she can't. Daphne agreed. But purebloods have always had their ways to make their recalcitrant daughters behave. Thankfully, we're already engaged. I guess I'll have to write her and tell her the happy news soon. I rose my eyebrows at that. You didn't tell her yet. I thought you had after the Malfoy contract. Daphne gave me an impish grin in return. No, I was curious to say. What she was willing to do to protect the Greengrass name. But this has gone too far. Snake, I replied and shook my head. Although, I couldn't really blame her, not wanting the additional attention. We hadn't told any of our co-passengers about our engagement, either, not even Alvira and Willie. Daphne wore a glamour charm on her hand every time we left the suite. I had no one to tell about our engagement anymore. I'd never been on writing terms with any of my classmates except Ron and Hermione, so it felt weird to write to Neville and Luna, just to tell them about my engagement. They WOULD learn soon enough when we returned to England. She took my remark as a compliment, I think. Again, she pulled the contract towards her and scanned it. Who's the unhappy bloke who won't get you? I joked. It's Theo. She informed me with a giggle. Actually, he'll be extremely happy about my refusal. He doesn't want to marry me. Come again. Why by Merlin's saggy nadgers does he offer for you if he doesn't want to marry you? I asked, flummoxed. Language, Harry, she reprimanded me, but she lacked Hermione's fervor on that score. My grin showed her that I wasn't impressed at all. The contract is worded rather cleverly. It applies to any woman who descends from the House of Greengrass, she explained. It didn't take me long to figure that out. Davis. Not wants to marry Davis. I exclaimed. I'd never have thought he'd offer for a half-blood. His family also belongs to the Sacred 28, doesn't it? Daphne nodded. That's correct. Theo was his father's son, just like Malfoy, until our 5th year. Then something happened that made him change his point of view. Oh, outwardly he'd still pretend to be a blood supremacist and Death Eater wannabe. But inwardly he made a complete 180. What happened? I asked, my curiosity piqued. Tracy happened, Daphne replied with a small chuckle. She and Theo started dating. Secretly, of course. There would have been hell to pay for them from our housemates and Theo's family, had they come into the open. Even though Tracy never spoke about her blood status, everyone knew that she was a half-blood. After all, we all had to learn our genealogy sheets before we came to Hogwarts. I inwardly shook my head at that. Quite a lot of aspects of pureblood culture were just plain ridiculous. Theo was devastated when Tracy I disappeared in the summer before our 6th year and didn't return to Hogwarts. He became withdrawn and eventually broke up with his old friends, especially Malfoy, Daphne continued. Tracy wrote to M.E. that they ran into each other in Diagon Alley the day after the Davises had returned to England. Again, she chuckled. Obviously, the spark's still there. Believe me, I'd never have expected to get such a sappy letter from Tracy. She used to be the tough girl while we shared a dorm. A Davis head over heels in love was hard to imagine, I had to give her that. What are you going to do about it? I asked. Oh, that's easy. I'll enter into negotiations with him, as he so formally requested of the head of House Greengrass. I suppose he'll already wait for us at the pier when the Princess Isabella arrives in Southampton. Daphne grinned. I raised my eyebrows at that. You're going to keep the poor bloke in suspense for another 3 weeks. Why in the world would you do that? He wants something from me. But in turn he'll have to give me something we need, she explained. The longer I keep him in the loop, the more agreeable he'll be to my suggestion. My lack of understanding must have shown on my face, because she said, I want Theo to join the neutral faction, Harry. I frowned at that. Though her course of action was a far cry from the bribery Lucius Malfoy had employed, it didn't sit well with me. On the other hand, I had heard enough from her about the workings of Slytherin House, and was Slytherin enough on the inside myself, to understand where she came from, and that no Slytherin would think badly of her because of the means she employed to get her way. They dealt in favors, not in money. So, I didn't object as loud and as vehemently to her plans as I would have during my school days. Instead, I decided to employ my own inner Slytherin. I think you won't need to use these tactics on him, love. He fought in the battle. That means he'd left his father's political stance behind him. I bet he'll take the chance to join the neutral faction as soon as it's offered to him, especially if you hint that will also include my acquaintanceship. Be generous to him about his offer for Tracy. And he'll eat out of the palm of your hand. She considered my point of view. You're right, love, she finally agreed. I'll write him today that I'll accept his offer for tea. Racy and will meet with him to negotiate the details as soon as we're back in England. She immediately started to act on her words and pulled the parchment towards her. She never noticed the small smile of satisfaction on my lips when I returned to my own mail. HPDG. The next day the Princess Isabella reached South Africa, and anchored in Port Elizabeth. Most passengers chose a guided tour one of the game reserves around the city. Daphne and I opted for a guided tour through the Addo Elephant National Park in a small group. As the name said, we saw many elephants, but also lions, kudos, buffaloes and hyenas. It was interesting, but personally I couldn't wait for the Princess Isabella to reach Cape Town. That would be the case 2 days later. That evening, Daphne finally agreed on a shark cage diving tour. "All right, Harry. Book the tour," she said when we had to make the reservations. "I'll even come with you." I looked at her, flabbergasted. "Daphne, you're as afraid as hell of sharks. You'll be stressed out all day long." She shrugged and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Probably. But I'm also engaged to you, and that means I'll stand by your side, be it in tea." He whizzangamoed in a small boat with a horde of great white sharks swimming around us. "The sharks are probably less dangerous, I suppose." That made me laugh. I put my arms around her and kissed her. "Thank you, Daphne. I'll make it up to you in Madeira." Leaning against me, she let a hand run through my hair. "I'll take you up on that, love. Mind you, if you get eaten up by a shark, I'll never speak a word to you again." I burst out laughing at that, which of course earned me a slap on the shoulder. "You are she started, but never finished the sentence as I pressed my lips onto hers. HPDG. A car picked us up at the pier early in the morning. From there, we drove to a small port near Cape Town. It was a sunny, yet windy day, and the air smelled of salt and seaweed. We got a thorough safety briefing, and then entered a boat that would bring us to the spots where the great white sharks could be usually seen. The ride was drafty and cold. Quite frequently, we were hit by sea spray. Thankfully, the company provided us with jackets for protection against the cold and the frequent showers. However, Daphne huddled against me. Her face looked very small and pale against the bright orange of the protection jacket. I grasped her hand. It was ice cold and trembled slightly. Finally, we reached the first viewing spot, and the crew began to attract the huge predators. It didn't take long for the first sharks to turn up. Daphne watched them, a mix of fascination and terror on her face, and shuddered. Those who wished to enter the iron cage at the side of the boat were given wetsuits and masks. Of course, I also wanted to have a first-row look. While I waited for my turn to enter the cage, we watched the awe-inspiring animals from above as they circled the boat in search for a prey, and shot out of the water, snapping for the baits the crew had laid out. They were huge, and it was easy to imagine that they could swallow you with one bite. I was beginning to have second thoughts about my wish to enter the cage. Even though Daphne was terrified of the sharks, as her white face clearly betrayed, and not at all happy with me that I wanted to go into the water, she tried to be a good sport about it. "Look at that one, Harry," she grinned at me and pointed at an exceptionally large shark that swam below us. "He has a bib with your name on it." "Ha ha," I replied, but had no time to come up with a witty retort, because it was now my turn to enter the cage. Daphne went even paler. "Be careful," she whispered in my ear as she kissed me on the cheek. I nodded and gave her a brief hug. My throat suddenly too dry to speak. Surreptitiously, I felt for the wand in its invisible holster at my right forearm and drew comfort from the thought that I could immediately apparate out of the cage if need be. I took a deep breath. My heart beat like a jackhammer when I climbed into the cage. In spite of the wetsuit that protected me, the water was freezing cold. My divers were all distracted by the adventure we were about to have, so I dared to cast a warming charm on myself, before I took a deep breath and dunked into the water. The first impression were hundreds of dull, yet loud noises around me. The sea was choppy and the visibility was not more than 9 yards. I heard the gurgling of the waves clashing against the side of the boat, interspersed with clanking of the cage every time it touched the boat, or was rammed by a shark. The crew drew baits through the water, right in front of the cage. 3 huge white sharks were trying to get at them. They shot towards the cage, and I involuntarily recoiled until I was pressed flat against the back of the cage. My co-divers didn't fare any better. The huge predators snapped for the bait, but instead bit into the upper part of the cage. For a second I got the impression of wide-open jaws with rows of murderous teeth right in front of me, before the animals dived away, in search of the elusive bait. I shuddered. Yet I couldn't help but admire the powerful, yet graceful movements of the impressive predators. Even though I wore a wetsuit and had cast a warming charm on me, I couldn't stay in the icy water for long. My teeth clattered, but the grin on my face almost split my face into halves as I climbed out of the cage. This surely had been one of the most impressive experiences of my life. DG. Our stay in Cape Town had been the last highlight of the cruise. 10 long days at sea followed before the Princess Isabella would reach the island of Madeira, the last destination of the crew. Eyes before we headed back to Southampton. We enjoyed the last, lazy days before we were to be back in the wizarding world and under constant scrutiny. I had learned to deal with Guinea's daily letters by now and simply filed them away. If I had thought cousin Melissa would stop harassing Daphne after she had learned about our engagement, I was utterly mistaken. The day after we had left Cape Town, Daphne received another bulky letter from her. My fiancé frowned as she opened it. What by Merlin's unmentionables does she want now? She asked rhetorically. I waited with bated breath until Daphne had finished reading the letter. I don't know what I had expected her reaction would be, but I had surely not expected her to break out into laughter. Care to share what's so funny? I asked. Daphne handed me the letter. She's already planning our wedding, she wheezed. She's what? I exclaimed and took the letter from her. A quick scan told me my fiancé hadn't lied. The letter contained lists of possible dates, places and whatever else women thought necessary for a wedding. I blinked, not trusting my eyes. Are you going to let her go on with this? I asked as I handed the letter back to Daphne. I mean, we haven't talked about all that yet. I gestured towards the letter. But she's got a point. Aren't we supposed to pick a date and all that? And all that, Daphne smiled and blew me a kiss. I think there isn't a girl on earth who hasn't dreamed about her perfect wedding before she's even entered school. I'm no exception to that. I've always dreamt of getting married in the summer in the gazebo that overlooks the pond and the gardens of Grenion Hall. I smiled at her and took her hand. That sounds nice. She beamed and squeezed my hand. I'm happy you like it. However, tea will have to wait until I've rebuilt Grenion Hall. I've already written to the goblins for a first meeting with their constructors after we're back, but I think it'll take at least 3 years until everything is ready. At the moment, I only have the money to get the foundation work done after I've obtained a pair of new elves to maintain the wards. Do you mind waiting that long? You know I don't, I replied. Though, 3 years is a long time. I'd thought. I interrupted myself and furrowed my eyebrows when an idea began to take shape in my mind. Daphne gave me a questioning glance. What's the matter, Harry? You're talking about magical marriage vows, aren't you? I asked. She nodded. Will they be recognized by the Muggle authorities? You know most of the Potter holdings are Muggle. So, it would be an advantage if the Muggle authorities also knew about our marriage. That's a valid point, she conceded. I'm positive that magical marriage vows are not automatically registered with the Muggles. In fact, I remember Melissa telling me that she and Matthew had to deal with the Muggle tax department and they needed their marriage certificate. They took a blank sheet of paper and silently confounded the officer. I considered that. It was a fast and practical solution, but once again a reminder that the wizarding world looked down on Muggles and often fooled them. I didn't want to be like that. There had to be another way. That's not a good idea, considering how vast the Potter holdings are. Something like that will probably blow up in our faces one day, I told my fiancé. Very likely. Daphne agreed and bit her lips. So, you think we ought to get married the Muggle way, too? That seems to be the sensible thing to do, doesn't it? Or will we get in trouble for that with the Ministry for Magic? My heart started pounding hard. Would she agree with my idea? Daphne shook her head. No, there's no problem. In fact, the Ministry treats a Muggle marriage like a magical civil marriage. For example, like a couple bound only by a marriage contract and not also by magical binding vows. You can have both of it or choose only a contract or the vows, just as you please. In fact, most pureblood couples have a marriage contract in the beginning and exchange their magically binding vows only after a magical child is born into their union. I made a face to that. That's wrong on so many levels. I agree, Daphne said. But that's the way it was for centuries and still is for many families. People don't change their tunes just because you've won the battle, Harry. It will take years, probably decades, to vanquish pureblood ideas, and I dare say you won't be successful with every family. Most likely, I sighed. I stood up and stepped behind her chair, wrapping my arms around her. What do you think about having a Muggle civil wedding here on the Princess Isabella? Then we can rebuild Grenion House together and exchange our magical vows there as soon as it's ready. Daphne's breath caught. Then her eyes got wide. She turned her head to me. You mean, now, before we reach Southampton? Either that or we'll return for another cruise whenever you like and get married then, I replied. My heart thumping like a drum. She considered my words for seemingly endless minutes. Then a look of determination spread over her face. Let's do it now, Harry. I couldn't believe my luck. Are you sure, love? I asked, just to be certain. The light in her eyes almost blinded me. Absolutely. I whooped with joy, picked her up and whirled her around. Put me down, you oaf. Daphne laughed. When I obeyed, she threw her arms around my neck and kissed me until I was dizzy. We spent the rest of the morning making plans. As a result, we went to the counter of the cruise agency after lunch and had a long talk with the cruise director. If he was amazed or skeptical about our plans, he hid it well under his professionalism. Probably he thought that marriages could be divorced easily these days. So it wouldn't matter if we made a mistake. Instead, he promised to do everything that was necessary that we could get married the day before we reached Southampton. Though he wasn't sure if the papers would come back from the Bahamas in time. He asked us if we had witnesses to stand up with us and pointed out that the officers and he himself would be honored to be of service. But we both agreed that we wanted to have Alvira and Willie with us that day. I don't want to know what would have happened, hadn't Alvira talked some sense into you. Daphne teased me. However, we weren't about to tell them right now, but were planning to surprise them on the day of the wedding. Of course, we had to swear the cruise director to secrecy. He laughed and promised not to tell. DG. The closer we got to England, the more we were sucked into the problems that waited there for us. Our schedule for our first week home filled rapidly a long time before we even reached Madeira. Daphne had written to Melissa and politely declined her suggestions for our upcoming nuptials. Instead, she had told her about our plans to rebuild Grenion Hall and to get married there. She got an enthusiastic letter back. Melissa was delighted that she planned to rebuild the family seat. She announced that she and her family would meet us at the pier in Southampton. After that, East would drive to the Davises' house and have dinner there and talk about the wedding. Are you going to accept that invitation? I asked. Daphne nodded. After all, I didn't get to see her face when she read about our engagement. Can you imagine her face when she once again tries to get me to move in with them and I'll tell her that I'd rather stay with my husband? I laughed at that. Yes, that will be interesting. So, Daphne wrote her cousin and accepted the invitation on behalf of both of us. On the 2nd of May there was to be a memorial service on the grounds of Hogwarts. The service will honor the fallen of the battle. But we will remember all victims of the First and the Second War against Voldemort, Kingsley had written to me in the letter where he told me about the planned festivities for Memorial Week. Daphne and I both had received a formal invitation to that event, to Daphne's big surprise. Your parents are victims of the war, just like my parents are the Longbottoms, I reminded her. Granted. But I'm a Slytherin and a member of the Sacred 28. She almost spat the last words. I raised my eyebrows at that. And your point is, people will automatically assume I am a pureblood supremacist because of that, she replied and bit her lip. Her worries were justified, I had to admit. Unfortunately, Ron and Dawlish were not alone with their prejudices. They'll see how wrong they were at the awards ceremony, I tried to console her. The awards ceremony was on the 5th of May and would take place in the Great Hall of Hogwarts. Everyone who had fought in the battle would be awarded at least with an Order of Merlin, 3rd class. That included the House Elves, the Centaurs and Grop too. I had insisted on that, if the Ministry wanted me to accept the Order of Merlin, 1st class. I was going to be awarded that day. I could almost hear Kingsley's booming laughter when he told me in one of his letters what a tizzy my demand had caused within the Wizengamot and the Ministry. As a veteran of the battle, Daphne also received an invitation to that event. She was to be awarded an Order of Merlin, 3rd class, as most of the defenders of Hogwarts. She had almost forgot. To breathe the day the letter arrived and she read the invitation. "Provided that they aren't occupied with booing me," was all Daphne answered now to my last remark. "I doubt that." Before the decision about the award was made, everyone and his or her contribution to the battle was checked thoroughly. "That you get an award shows that you earned it." She still looked doubtful. "Besides, people will be too busy with gossiping about the change of your name," I reminded her. During the awards ceremony, the recipients of one class would be called in alphabetical order of their last name. Daphne's name would then be Potter. Or at least Potter Greengrass. She hadn't decided yet whether to keep her maiden name with hyphenates. We were going to inform Kingsley 2 days before the ceremony. At Daphne's suggestion, I'd asked Kingsley and his lady friend Hestia Jones to visit us for dinner on the 3rd. She had pointed out that I ought to talk to Kingsley about my plans for the Wizengamot as soon as possible, and I had agreed. Arthur Weasley had written back and agreed on meeting us on the morning of the 3rd of May at the Leaky Cauldron. I was not looking forward to that meeting, but it had to be done. The biggest surprise, however, was a letter from Hermione. It didn't say much, only that she was sorry and needed to talk to Daphne and me. She asked us to stay after the memorial service and talk with her. Of course, I had agreed. The 2nd of May was a Sunday this year. I did not foresee any difficulties in finding an undisturbed spot on the grounds to talk. In any event, it looked as if we were going to be busy for the first 3 days after our return, with a short reprieve on the 4th of May. Although, I was afraid that day would be a bad one for Daphne. It was the first anniversary of the day she had returned home from the battle, only to find her home destroyed, her father killed and her mother tortured into insanity. Daphne's birthday was on the 7th. I already had plans for that day, though Daphne had no idea what I was planning and wouldn't find out before her birthday. The Ministry Ball in honor of the veterans of the Battle of Hogwarts would take place on the 8th. After that, we would hopefully be able to settle into our normal life. Though, I had my doubts about that. Normality was not a concept that applied to me, considering my life up till now. And while I didn't need a new Dark Lord coming after me anytime soon, I was looking forward to the challenge of trying to change our society, Daphne by my side. HPDG. Before we knew it, the Princess Isabella reached Madeira. This time, Daphne got to pick how we would spend our time on land. Although an island, Madeira wasn't famous for its beaches, so I wondered which of the offered activities would catch Daphne's fancy. She picked a hiking trip that led us alongside a levada, an ancient irrigation channel, up into the mountains. The vegetation alongside the channel was overwhelming, and probably the reason why she had picked that route. After an hour I had lost count how many times she had stopped and pointed out rare plants to me, quite a lot of them even being magical. However, I was a good sport about it, just as she had been during the shark cage diving trip, and listened to her explanations attentively. Though I have to admit I had more fun observing her obvious enthusiasm than actually admiring the plants. The tour ended at a small hut where we enjoyed the picnic the crew had packed for us. Thanks to featherweight charms, it hadn't been a bother at all to carry the food in my backpack. Instead of walking, we decided to apparate back to the starting point, from where we took the bus to Funchal. We still had some time on our hands which we spent exploring the small town, before we returned to the ship. Back in our cabin we found the papers we needed to get married on board, with a note from the cruise director that the ceremony would take place the day after tomorrow in the afternoon on the bridge. Daphne and I shared a look. "That was fast," she remarked. "I hadn't expected them to get the papers in time." "There's still time enough to cancel it if you've got second thoughts, Daphne," I told her. She shook her head. "I'm not having second thoughts, love. I was just surprised. You heard the cruise director saying that he was not sure if the papers would come back from the Bahamas in time. I'd thought we would have needed to book another cruise to get married later in the year." "When are we going to tell Alvira and Willie?" I asked. "Tomorrow night after dinner. I can't wait to see Alvira's face." Daphne grinned. HPDG. For the rest of my life, I cursed myself that I didn't think of bringing a camera with me when we asked Alvira and Willie to be our witnesses. Alvira gaped at us, open-mouthed. For at least a minute, her eyes wide open. I think you broke her, Willie said with an amused side glance at his wife. Congratulations to both of you. I'm honored to be your witness. We were in the atrium of the Princess Isabella. It was a huge room with a bar to one side and the reception on the other. Groups of comfortable low chairs around small tables were scattered around the room. Soft piano music played in the background. As always, the atrium wasn't as crowded and as noisy as the bars. It was the place to go on board if you wanted to enjoy a nice talk with your friends over a drink. Willie signaled the waiter and ordered champagne for all of us. The arrival of the sparkling beverage finally roused his wife out of her stupor. She jumped up and hugged first Daphne, then me. I always said you make a wonderful couple. She cried. So, you don't think we're rushing in? Daphne asked after Willie and Elvira had brought out a toast to us. Well, on the outside, it certainly seems so. Elvira replied, putting her glass on the table. But I've watched you closely over the last months. You have a lot in common. You've both lost your parents at a very young age and have to fend for yourself while most of your peers are still living with their parents and can rely on their advice. You need and depend on each other in a way that other young people of your age wouldn't understand. An early marriage will give you the sense of belonging and family you're both missing. So, I'd say go for it. Of course, there are no guarantees, but if I ever saw a couple who can make it work, it's the two of you. I never saw young people of your age who are that considerate of each other as you are. Daphne and I exchanged a look and blushed. Thank you, Elvira. That means a lot to us. Daphne said. We stayed in the atrium with the Mehans until the wee hours of the morning. They regaled us with stories of their early years of marriage. I think I never laughed as hard and as much as that night. Of course we overslept the next morning. There was no time for our usual morning swim. We went down for a late breakfast, and then Daphne left me with a kiss on my cheek. She and Elvira had an appointment at the spa that morning. I had no idea what to do with myself. While I walked to the elevator to get back to the suite, I realized that it was impossible for me to sit in the suite and wait for Daphne's return. So, I changed and went for a long run on the track. The run did wonders to calm down my nerves. I wouldn't admit it for anything in the world, but I was a nervous wreck that day. Until then, I had had no idea that it was possible to be completely over the moon and frightened to death at the same time. Finally, Daphne returned from the spa. Obviously, she and Elvira had enjoyed themselves immensely, with a glass of champagne or two, because her cheeks were glowing and her eyes beamed like stars. We met the Mehans for a late lunch at the Lido Cafe. Willie and I exchanged a look and decided in mutual, but silent agreement, to order coffee afterwards. However, it didn't help much to sober up Daphne. Elvira took me aside before we left to get changed for the big event. She didn't have that much, Harry. I made sure of that. I think she's just drunk with happiness. She had a point there. Daphne practically danced back to our suite. Her happiness was contagious. I felt my inward agitation fade away. Instead, I felt a certainty come over me. The step we were taking today was the right thing to do. We took our time to get changed. That is, Daphne took her time. I was waiting for her for about an hour, dressed in the gray suit she had picked out for me that day in Fort Lauderdale. It seemed so long ago, after all we had experienced. But only just 3.5 months had passed since then. Finally, Daphne emerged from the bedroom. That moment, time and space ceased to exist for me. Daphne is one of the most beautiful women I'd ever met. Even if I have to agree that I'm more than slightly biased in that regard. However, that day her beauty was not from this world. It was not so much the way she looked. She wore a simple summer dress and sandals. And as always next to no makeup, but in the way she smiled at me and the blissful expression on her face. I swear, had Voldemort ever had a woman look at him that way, he would never have thought of getting the magical world under his thumb. He would have been too busy making her happier than ever to squander a thought on world supremacy. Breathe, Harry, she said and touched my arm. I hadn't realized that I had been staring at her open-mouthed. You are the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, I told her, taking a deep breath. She smiled and caressed my cheek. Thank you, love. I bent down and handed her the small bouquet of pink roses I had ordered for her. The flowers matched her dress perfectly. She took my arm, and then we walked down to the bridge on the deck below us. Elvira and Willie were already waiting for us. My memory of the events that followed are hazy, I have to admit. I remember that we were ushered onto the bridge. The captain greeted us and then held a small speech. But I can't remember what he talked about. Not once did my eyes leave Daphne's face. I suppose I must have looked like an idiot with that broad, goofy grin on my face. However, I managed to say, yes, when it was expected to me. Daphne's triumphant, yes, followed only seconds later. You may kiss the bride, the captain said through the laughter of Alvira, Willie and the officers on the bridge. Daphne threw her arms around my neck and we exchanged a short kiss. I could feel her broad smile under my lips. Everyone congratulated us. A laughing and crying ALV. Ira gave us a hug that rivaled Mrs. Weasley's best. Someone pressed a glass of champagne in my hand, and everyone toasted to us, even the captain and the officers, though they had orange juice in their glasses. Hand in hand, Daphne and I walked back to our suite. We knew that a special romantic dinner awaited us there, courtesy of the cruise company. As we had expected, the dinner was already there, tastefully arranged on the dining table, and a bottle of champagne waited in the cooler. However, we hadn't counted on the whole suite being decked in red roses, streamers and little hearts. There were even rose petals on the bed and in the bathtub, as we found out when we took a quick tour of the suite. Daphne and I exchanged a look. I saw how the corners of her mouth twitched, while her eyes again were drawn as if by a magnet to the rose petals floating in the bathtub. Are you thinking what I'm thinking right now? I asked, my voice quivering. She nodded, her eyes full of mirth. The next second we both lost the struggle against our laughter. Sweet Morgana. That looks like Madame Puddifoot's on Valentine's Day. My wife wheezed and leaned against me. I put my arms around her. Yes, the only thing that's missing is the little cupids, throwing confetti in our hair. And on our plates, my wife supplemented. That set us off again. Daphne was the first to calm down. She looked at me, a light in her eyes that made my knees suddenly turn into jelly, and slung her arms around my neck. Don't you think it would be an awful waste to let the water in that bathtub go cold? She purred in my ear. Absolutely, Mrs. Potter. I agreed and kissed her while my hands fumbled for the zipper of her dress. We didn't let the water go to waste that night. The dinner, however, had gone cold when we finally remembered it. The end. Thanks for watching, also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.